Chapter 9, Transformer. Bink was thrown into a pit. A pile of hay broke his fall, and a wooden roof set on 4 tall posts shaded him from the sun. Other than that, his prison was barren and bleak indeed. The walls were of some stone-like substance, too hard to dig into with his bare hands, too sheer to climb. The floor was packed earth. He walked around it. The wall was solid all around, and too high for him to surmount. He could almost touch the top when he jumped and reached up, but a lattice of metal bars across the top sealed him in. He might, with special effort, get high enough to catch hold of one of those bars, but then all he would be able to do would be to hang there. It might represent exercise, but it wouldn't get him out. So the cage was tight. He had hardly come to this conclusion before soldiers came to stand at the grate, shaking rust onto him. They stood in the shade of the roof while one of them squatted down to unlock the little door set in that grate and swing it up and open. Then they dropped a person through. It was the woman Fanchon. Bink jumped across, wrapping his arms around her before she hit the straw, breaking her fall. They both sprawled in the hay. The door slammed shut, and the lock clicked. "Now, I know my beauty didn't overwhelm you," she remarked as they disentangled. "I was afraid you'd break a leg," Bink said defensively. "I almost did, when they threw me in here." She glanced down at her knobby knees, showing beneath her dull skirt. A break couldn't hurt the appearance of either leg. Not far off the mark. Bink had never seen a more homely girl than this one, but what was she doing here? Why should the evil magician throw his stooge in the den with his prisoner? This was no way to trick the captive into talking. The proper procedure would be to tell Bink she had talked, and offer him his freedom for confirming the information. Even if she were genuine, she still should not have been confined with him. She could have been imprisoned separately. Then the guards would tell each one that the other had talked. Now, if she had been beautiful, they might have thought she could vamp him into telling. But as she was, not a chance. It just didn't seem to make sense. "Why didn't you tell him about the shield stone?" Bink inquired, not certain with what irony he intended it. If she were a fake, she could not have told, but she also should not have been dumped in here. If she were genuine, she must be loyal to Xanth. But then, why had she said she would tell Trent where the shield stone was? "I told him." She said, she had told him. Now Bink hoped she was phony. "Yes," she said, looking him straight in the eye. "I told him how it was set under the throne in the king's palace in the North Village." Bink tried to assess the ramifications of this statement. It was the wrong location, but did she know this? Or was she trying to trick him into a reaction, a revelation of its real location while the guards listened? Or was she a true exile, who knew the location and had lied about it? That would account for Trent's reaction. Because if Trent's catapult lobbed an elixir bomb on the palace of Xanth, not only would it fail to disrupt the shield, it would alert the king, or at least the more alert ministers, who were not fools to the nature of the threat. The damping out of magic in that vicinity would quickly give it away. Had Trent actually lobbed his bomb, and had he now lost all hope of penetrating Xanth? The moment the threat was known, they would move the shield stone to a new, secret location, so that no information from exiles would be valid. No, if that had happened, Trent would have turned Fanchon into a toad and stepped on her, and he would not have bothered to keep Bink prisoner. Bink might have been killed or released, but not simply kept. So nothing that drastic had happened. Anyway, there had not been time for all that. "I see you don't trust me," Fanchon said, "a fair analysis." "I can't afford to," he admitted. "I don't want anything to happen to Xanth. Why should you care? Since you got kicked out, I knew the rule." "I was given a fair hearing," she exclaimed indignantly. "The king didn't even read Humphrey's note or taste the water from the spring of life." Bink paused again. "How would she know that?" "Oh, come on," she said. "I passed through your village only hours after your trial. It was the talk of the town. How the magician Humphrey had authenticated your magic, but the king—" Okay, Bink said. Obviously she had come from Xanth, but he still wasn't sure how far he could trust her. Yet she must know the shield stone's location and hadn't told it. Unless she had told it and Trent didn't believe her, so was waiting for corroboration from Bink. But she had announced the wrong location, no purpose in that, regardless. Bink could challenge her on it, but that would still not give away the right location. There were 1,000 potential spots. So probably she meant what she said. She had tried to fool Trent, and had not succeeded, so the balance in Bink's mind shifted. Now he believed she was from Xanth and she had not betrayed it. That was what the available evidence suggested. How complex could Trent's machinations become? Maybe he had a mundane machine that could somehow pick up news from inside the shield. Or more likely, he had a magic mirror set up in the magic zone just outside the shield, so he could learn interior news. No, in that case he could have ascertained the location of the shield stone directly. Bink felt dizzy. He didn't know what to think, but he certainly wasn't going to mention the key location. I wasn't exiled, if that's what you're thinking, Fanchen said. They don't yet ban people for being ugly. I emigrated voluntarily. Why? Well, I had 2 reasons. What 2 reasons? She looked at him. I'm afraid you would not believe either one. Try me and see. First, the magician Humphrey told me it was the simplest solution to my problem. What problem? Bink was hardly in a good mood. She gave him another straight look that mounted to a stare. Must I spell it out? Bink found himself reddening. Obviously her problem was her appearance. Fanchen was a young woman, but she was not plain, not homely, but ugly, the living proof that youth and health were not necessarily beauty. No clothing, no makeup could help her nearly enough, only magic could do it. Which seemed to make her departure from Xanth nonsensical. Was her judgment as warped as her body? Faced with the social necessity of changing the subject, he fixed on another objection, an aspect of his thought, but there's no magic in Mundania. Precisely, again his logic stumbled. Fanchen was as difficult to talk with as to look at. You mean magic makes you what you are? What a marvel of tact he demonstrated, but she did not chide him for his lack of social grace. Yes, more or less. Why didn't Humphrey charge you his fee? He couldn't stand the sight of me, worse and worse. What was your other reason for leaving Xanth? That I shall not tell you at this time, it figured. She had said he wouldn't believe her reasons. And he had believed the first one, so she wouldn't tell him the other. Typically female logic. Well, we seem to be prisoners together, Bink said, glancing around the pit again. It remained as dismal as ever. Do you think they're going to feed us? Certainly, Fanchen said. Trent will come around and dangle bread and water at us, and ask which one would like to give him the information. That one will be fed. It will become increasingly difficult to turn him down as time passes. You have a gruesomely quick comprehension. I am gruesomely smart, she said. In fact, it is fair to say I am as smart as I am ugly, yes indeed. Are you smart enough to figure out how to get out of here? No, I don't think escape is possible, she said, shaking her head in a definite yes. Oh, Bink said, taken aback. Her word said no, her gesture said yes. Was she crazy? No, she knew the guards were listening, though they were out of sight. So she sent them one message while sending Bink another. Which meant she had figured out an escape already. It was now afternoon. A shaft of sunlight spilled through the grate, finding its route past the edge of the roof. Just as well, Bink thought, it would get unbearably dank in here if the sun never reached the bottom. Trent came to the grate. I trust you two have made your acquaintance, he said pleasantly. Are you hungry? Now it comes, Fanchen muttered. I apologize for the inconvenience of your quarters, Trent said, squatting down with perfect aplomb. It was as if he were meeting them in a clean office. If you both will give me your word not to depart these premises or interfere with our activities in any way, I shall arrange a comfortable tent for you. Therein lies subversion, Fanchen said to Bink. Once you start accepting favors, you become obligated. Don't do it, she was making extraordinary sense. No deal, Bink said. You see, Trent continued smoothly, if you were in a tent and you tried to escape, my guards would have to put arrows in you and I don't want that to happen. It would be most uncomfortable for you, and would imperil my source of information. So it is vital that I have you confined by one means or another. By word or bond, as it were. This pit has the sole virtue of being secure. You could always let us go, Bink said. Since you aren't going to get the information anyway, if that ruffled the evil magician, he did not show it. Here is some cake and wine, Trent said, lowering a package on a cord. Neither Bink nor Fanchen reached for it, though Bink suddenly felt hungry and thirsty. The odors of spice wafted through the pit temptingly. Obviously the package contained fresh, good things. Please take it, Trent said. I assure you it is neither poisoned nor drugged. I want you both in good health, for when you change us into toads. Bink asked loudly. What did he have to lose? Really? No, I am afraid you have called my bluff on that. Toads do not speak intelligibly and it is important to me that you speak. Could the evil magician have lost his talent in the course of his long mundane exile? Bink began to feel better. The package touched the straw. Fanchen shrugged and squatted, untying it. Sure enough, cake and wine. Maybe one of us better eat now, she said. If nothing happens in a few hours, the other eats. Ladies first, Bink said. If the food were drugged and she were a spy, she wouldn't touch it, thank you. She broke the cake in half. Pick a piece, she said. You eat that one, Bink said, pointing. Very nice, Trent said from above. You trust neither me nor each other. So you are working out conventions to safeguard your interests. But it really is unnecessary. If I wanted to poison either of you, I would merely pour it on your heads. Fanchen took a bite of cake. This is very good, she said. She uncorked the wine and took a swig. This too, but Bink remained suspicious. He would wait. I have been considering your cases, Trent said. Fanchen, I will be direct. I can transform you into any other life form, even another human being. He squinted down at her. How would you like to be beautiful, oh? If Fanchen were not a spy, this would be a compelling offer. The ugly one converted to beauty dash, go away, Fanchen said to Trent. Before I throw a mudball at you. But then she thought of something else. If you're really going to leave us here, at least give us some sanitary facilities. A bucket and a curtain. If I had a lovely posterior I might not mind the lack of privacy, but as it is I prefer to be modest, aptly expressed, Trent said. He gestured, and the guards brought the items and lowered them through the hole in the grate. Fanchen set the pot in one corner and removed pins from her straggly hair to tack the cloth to the two walls, forming a triangular chamber. Bink wasn't sure why a girl of her appearance should affect such modesty. Surely no one would gawk at her exposed flesh regardless of its ronda. Unless she really was extremely sensitive, with her remarks making light of what remained a serious preoccupation. In that case it did make sense. A pretty girl could express shock and distress if someone saw her bare torso, but privately she would be pleased if the reaction were favorable. Fanchen had no such pretense. Bink was sorry for her, and for himself. It would have made the confinement much more interesting if his companion had been scenic. But actually he was grateful for the privacy, too. Natural functions would otherwise have been awkward. So he was full circle. She had defined the problem before he ever started thinking it out. She obviously did have a quicker mind. He's not fooling about making you beautiful, Bink said. He can, it wouldn't work. No, Trent's talent, I know his talent. But it would only aggravate my problem even if I were willing to betray Xanth. This was strange. She did not want beauty. Then why her extraordinary sensitivity about her appearance? Or was this some other ploy to get him to tell the location of the shield stone? He doubted it. She obviously was from Xanth. No outsider could have guessed about his experience with the water of the spring of life and the senile king. Time passed. Evening came. Fanchen suffered no ill effects, so Bink ate and drank his share of the meal. At dusk it rained. The water poured through the lattice. The roof provided some shelter, but enough slanted in to wet them down thoroughly anyway. But Fanchen smiled. Good, she whispered. The fates are with us tonight, good. Bink shivered in his wet clothing, and watched her wonderingly. She scraped with her fingers in the softening floor of the pit. Bink walked over to see what she was up to, but she waved him away. Make sure the guards don't see, she whispered, small danger of that. The guards weren't interested. They had taken shelter from the rain, and were not in sight. Even if they had been close, it was getting too dark to see. What was so important about this business? She was scooping out mud from the floor and mixing it with the hay, heedless of the rain. Bink couldn't make any sense of it. Was this her way of relaxing? Did you know any girls in Xanth? Fanchen inquired. The rain was slacking off, but the darkness protected her secret work from Bink's comprehension as well as that of the guards. It was a subject Bink would have preferred to avoid. I don't see what. She moved over to him. I'm making bricks, idiot, she whispered fiercely. Keep talking and watch for any lights. If you see anyone coming, say the word chameleon. I'll hide the evidence in a hurry. She glided back to her corner. Chameleon. There was something about that word now he had it. The chameleon lizard he had seen just before starting on his quest to the good magician, his omen of the future. The chameleon had died abruptly. Did this mean his time was come? Talk. Fanchen urged. Cover my sounds. Then, in conversational tone, you did know some girls? Some, Bink said. Bricks? What for? Were they pretty? Her hands were blurred by the night, but he could hear the little slaps of mud and rustle of hay. She could be using the hay to contribute fiber to the mud brick. But the whole thing was crazy. Did she intend to build a brick privy, or not so pretty? She prompted him. Oh. Pretty. He said. It seemed he was stuck with this topic. If the guards were listening, they would pay more attention to him talking about pretty girls than to her slapping mud. Well, if that was what she wanted, my fiancée, Sabrina, was beautiful and the sorceress Iris seemed beautiful, but I met others who weren't. Once they get old or married, the rain had abated. Bink saw a light approaching. Chameleon, he murmured, again experiencing inner tension. Omens always were accurate if understood correctly. Women don't have to get ugly when they marry, Fanchon said. The sounds had changed, now she was concealing the evidence. Some start out that way. She certainly was conscious of her condition. This made him wonder again why she had turned down Trent's offer of beauty. I met a lady centaur on my way to the magician Humphrey, Bink said, finding it difficult to concentrate even on so natural a subject as this in the face of the oddities of his situation. Imprisoned in a pit with an ugly girl who wanted to make bricks. She was beautiful, in a statuesque kind of way. Of course she was basically a horse, bad terminology. I mean, from the rear she well. I rode her back, conscious of what the guards might think he was saying, not that he should even care what they thought. He eyed the approaching light. He saw it mainly by reflections from the bars. You know, she was half equine. She gave me a ride through Centaur country, the light diminished. It must be a guard on routine patrol. False alarm, he whispered. Then, in conversational tone, but there was one really lovely girl on the way to the magician. Her name was. He paused to concentrate. Win. But she was abysmally stupid. I hope the Gap Dragon didn't catch her. You were in the Gap, for a while. Until the dragon chased me off. I had to go around it. I'm surprised you know of it. I had thought there was a forget spell associated with it, because it was not on my map and I never heard of it until I encountered it. Though how it is that I remember it, in that case, I lived near the Gap, she said. You lived there. When was it made? What is its secret? It was always there. There is a forget spell. I think the magician Humphrey put it there. But if your associations are really strong, you remember. At least for a while. Magic only goes so far, maybe that's it. I'll never forget my experience with the dragon and the shade. Fanchon was making bricks again. Any other girls? Bink had the impression she had more than casual interest in the matter. Was it because she knew the people of the chasm region? Let's see, there was one other I met. An ordinary girl. She had an argument with the soldier I was with, Crombie. He was a woman hater, or at least professed to be, and she walked out. Too bad, I rather liked her. Oh. I thought you preferred pretty girls. Look, don't be so damned sensitive, he snapped. You brought up the subject. I liked D better than oh, never mind. I'd have been happier talking about plans to escape. Sorry, she said. I knew about your journey around the chasm. Win and D are friends of mine. So naturally I'm concerned. Friends of yours? Both of them? Pieces of a puzzle began to fit together. What is your association with the sorceress Iris? Fanchon laughed. None at all. If I were the sorceress, do you think I would look like this? Yes, Bink said. If you tried beauty and it didn't work, and you still wanted power and figured you could somehow get it through an ignorant traveler, that would explain why Trent couldn't tempt you with the promise of beauty. That would only ruin your cover and you could be beautiful any time you wanted to be. So you might follow me out in a disguise nobody would suspect, and of course you would not help another magician take over Xanth, so I'd come right out here into Mundania, where there is no magic, she finished. Therefore no illusion. That gutted his case. Or did it? Maybe this is the way you actually look. I may never have seen the real Iris. They're on her island, and how would I get back into Xanth? For that Bink had no answer. He responded with bluster. Well, why did you come here? Obviously the non-magic aspect has not solved your problem. Well, it takes time to cancel out magic, certainly. When dragons used to fly out over Mundania, before the shield was set up, it would take them days or weeks to fade. Maybe even longer. Magician Humphrey says there are many pictures and descriptions of dragons and other magic beasts in mundane texts. The mundanes don't see dragons anymore, so they think the old texts are fantasy, but this proves that it takes a while for the magic in a creature or person to dissipate. So a sorceress could retain her illusion for a few days after all, Bink said. She sighed. Maybe so. But I'm not Iris, though I certainly wouldn't mind being her. I had entirely different and compelling reasons to leave Xanth. Yes, I remember. One was to lose your magic, whatever it was, and the other you wouldn't tell me. I suppose you deserve to know. You're going to have it out of me one way or another. I learned from Win and Dee what sort of a person you were, and... So Win did get away from the dragon, yes, thanks to you. A light was coming. Chameleon, Bink said. Fanchon scrambled to hide her bricks. This time the light came all the way to the pit. I trust you have not been flooded out down there. Trent's voice inquired. If we were, we'd swim away from here, Bink said. Listen, magician, the more uncomfortable you make us, the less we want to help you. I am keenly aware of that, Bink. I would much prefer to provide you with a comfortable tent. No, Bink, I find it difficult to comprehend why you should be so loyal to a government that treated you so shabbily. What do you know about that? My spies have of course been monitoring your dialogues. But I could have guessed it readily enough, knowing how old and stubborn the Storm King must be by now. Magic manifests in diverse forms, and when the definitions become too narrow, well, it doesn't make any difference here, the magician persisted, sounding quite reasonable in contrast to Bink's unreason. It may be that you do lack magic, Bink, though I hardly think Humphrey would be wrong about a thing like that. But you have other qualities to recommend you, and you would make an excellent citizen. He's right, you know, Fanchon said. You do deserve better than you were given. Which side are you on? Bink demanded. She sighed in the dark. She sounded very human. It was easier to appreciate that quality when he couldn't see her. I'm on your side, Bink. I admire your loyalty. I'm just not sure it's deserved. Why don't you tell him where the shield stone is, then if you know it, because, with all its faults, Xanth remains a nice place. The senile king won't live forever. When he dies they'll have to put in the magician Humphrey, and he'll make things much better, even if he does complain about the time it's wasting him. Maybe some new or young magician is being born right now, to take over after that. It'll work out somehow. It always has before. The last thing Xanth needs is to be taken over by a cruel, evil magician who would turn all his opposition into turnips. Trent's chuckle came down from above. My dear, you have a keen mind and a sharp tongue. Actually, I prefer to turn my opponents into trees, they are more durable than turnips. I don't suppose you could concede, merely for the sake of argument, that I might make a better ruler than the present king. He's got a point, you know, Bink said, smiling cynically in the dark. Which side are you on? Fanchon demanded, mimicking the tone Bink had used before. But it was Trent who laughed. I like you too, he said. I really do. You have good minds and good loyalty. If you would only give that loyalty to me, I would be prepared to make substantial concessions. For example, I might grant you veto power over any transformations I made. You could thus choose the turnips, so we'd be responsible for your crimes, Fanchon said. That sort of power would be bound to corrupt us very soon, until we were no different from you, only if your basic fiber were not superior to mine. Trent pointed out. And if it were not, then you would never have been any different from me. You merely have not yet been subjected to my situation. It would be best if you discovered this, so as not to be unconscious hypocrites. Bink hesitated. He was wet and cold, and he did not relish spending the night in this hole. Had Trent been one to keep his word, 20 years ago? No, he hadn't. He had broken his word freely in his pursuit of power. That was part of what had defeated him. No one could afford to trust him, not even his friends. The magician's promises were valueless. His logic was a tissue of rationalization, designed only to get one of the prisoners to divulge the location of the shield stone. Veto power over transformations. Bink and Fanchon would be the first to be transformed. Once the evil one had no further need of them, Bink did not reply. Fanchon remained silent. After a moment Trent departed, and so we weather temptation number 2, Fanchon remarked. But he's a clever and unscrupulous man, it will get harder. Bink was afraid she was right. Next morning the slanting sunlight baked the crude bricks. They were hardly hard yet, but at least it was a start. Fanchon placed the items in the privacy cubicle so that they could not be seen from above. She would set them out again for the afternoon sun, if all went well. Trent came by with more food, fresh fruit and milk. I dislike putting it on this footing, he said, but my patience is wearing thin. At any time they might move the shield stone routinely, rendering your information valueless. If one of you does not give me the information I need today, tomorrow I shall transform you both. You, Bink, will be a cockatrice, you, Fanchon, a basilisk. You will be confined in the same cage. Bink and Fanchon looked at each other with complete dismay. Cockatrice and basilisk, 2 names for the same thing, a winged reptile hatched from a yolkless egg laid by a rooster and hatched by a toad in the warmth of a dung heap. The stench of its breath was so bad that it wilted vegetation and shattered stone, and the very sight of its face would cause other creatures to keel over dead. Basilisk, the little king of the reptiles, the chameleon of his omen had metamorphosed into the likeness of a basilisk just before it died. Now he had been reminded of the chameleon by a person who could not have known about that omen, and threatened with transformation into, surely death was drawing nigh, it's a bluff. Fanchon said at last. He can't really do it. He's just trying to scare us, he's succeeding, Bink muttered. Perhaps a demonstration would be in order, Trent said. I ask no person to take my magic on faith, when it is so readily demonstrable. It is necessary for me to perform regularly, to restore my full talent after the long layoff in Mundania, so the demonstration is quite convenient for me. He snapped his fingers. Allow the prisoners to finish their meal, he said to the guard who reported. Then remove them from the cell. He left. Now Fanchon was glum for another reason. He may be bluffing, but if they come down in here, they'll find the bricks. That will finish us anyway, not if we move right out, giving them no trouble, Bink said. They won't come down here unless they have to, let's hope so, she said. When the guards came, Bink and Fanchon scrambled up the rope ladder the moment it was dropped. We're calling the magician's bluff, Bink said. There was no reaction from the soldiers. The party marched eastward across the isthmus, toward Xanth. Within sight of the shield, Trent stood beside a wire cage. Soldiers stood in a ring around him, arrows nocked to bows. They all wore smoked glasses. It looked very grim. Now I caution you, Trent said as they arrived. Do not look directly at each other's faces after the transformation. I cannot restore the dead to life. If this were another scare tactic, it was effective. Fanchon might doubt, but Bink believed. He remembered Justin Tree. Legacy of Trent's ire of 20 years ago. The omen loomed large in his mind. First to be a basilisk, then to die, Trent caught Bink's look of apprehension. Have you anything to say to me? He inquired, as if routinely. Yes. How did they manage to exile you without getting turned into toads or turnips or worse? Trent frowned. That was not precisely what I meant, Bink. But, in the interest of harmony, I will answer. An aide I trusted was bribed to put a sleep spell on me. While I slept. They carried me across the shield. How do you know it won't happen again? You can't stay awake all the time, you know. I spent much time pondering that whole problem in the long early years of my exile. I concluded that I had brought the deception upon myself. I had been faithless to others, and so others were faithless to me. I was not entirely without honor. I breached my given word only for what I deemed to be sufficient cause, yet, that's the same as lying, Bink said. I did not think so at the time. But I dare say my reputation in that respect did not improve in my absence. It is ever the privilege of the victor to present the loser as completely corrupt, thus justifying the victory. Nevertheless, my word was not my absolute bond, and in time I realized that this was the fundamental flaw in my character that had been my undoing. The only way to prevent repetition was to change my own mode of operation. And so I no longer deceive, ever. And no one deceives me, it was a fair answer. The evil magician was, in many respects, the opposite of the popular image. Instead of being ugly, weak, and mean, Humphrey fitted that description better. He was handsome, strong, and urbane. Yet he was the villain, and Bink knew better than to let fair words deceive him. Fanchon, stand forth, Trent said. Fanchon stepped toward him, open cynicism on her face. Trent did not gesture or chant. He merely glanced at her with concentration. She vanished. A soldier swooped in with a butterfly net, slamming it down on something. In a moment he held it up, a struggling, baleful, lizard-like thing with wings. It really was a basilisk. Bink quickly averted his eyes, lest he look directly at its horrible face and meet its deadly gaze. The soldier dumped the thing into the cage, and another glass-protected soldier shoved on the lid. The remaining soldiers relaxed visibly. The basilisk scrambled around, seeking some escape, but there was none. It glared at the wire confinement. But its gaze had no effect on the metal. A third soldier dropped a cloth over the cage, cutting off the view of the little monster. Now Bink himself relaxed. The whole thing had obviously been carefully prepared and rehearsed. The soldiers knew exactly what to do. Bink, stand forth, Trent said, exactly as before. Bink was terrified. But a corner of his mind protested, it's still a bluff. She's in on it. They have rigged it to make me think she was transformed, and that I'm to be next. All her arguments against Trent were merely to make her seem legitimate, preparing for this moment. Still, he only half believed that. The omen lent it a special, awful conviction. Death hovered, as it were, on the silent wings of a moth hawk, close, yet he could not betray his homeland. Weak-kneed, he stepped forth. Trent focused on him and the world jumped. Confused and frightened, Bink scrambled for the safety of a nearby bush. The green leaves withered as he approached, then the net came down, trapping him. Remembering his escape from the Gap Dragon, he dodged at the last moment, backtracking, and the net just missed him. He glared up at the soldier, who, startled, had allowed his smoked glasses to fall askew. Their gazes met and the man tumbled backward, stricken. The butterfly net flew wide, but another soldier grabbed it. Bink scooted for the withered bush again, but this time the net caught him. He was scooped inside, wings flapping helplessly, tail thrashing and getting its barb caught in the fabric. Claws snarled, beak snapping at nothing, then he was dumped out. 2 shakes, 3, and his claws and tail were dislodged. He landed on his back, wings outspread. An anguished squawk escaped him. As he righted himself, the light dimmed. He was in the cage, and it had just been covered, so that no one outside could see his face. He was a cockatrice, some demonstration. Not only had he seen Fanchon transformed, he had experienced it himself and killed a soldier merely by looking at him. If there had been any skeptics in Trent's army, there would be none now. He saw the curling, barbed tail of another of his kind. A female. But her back was to him. His cockatrice nature took over. He didn't want company. Angrily he pounced on her, biting, digging in with his talons. She twisted around instantly, the muscular serpent's tail providing leverage. For a moment they were face to face. She was hideous, frightful, loathsome, ghastly, and revolting. He had never before experienced anything so repulsive. Yet she was female, and therefore possessed of a certain fundamental attraction. The paradoxical repulsion and attraction overwhelmed him and he lost consciousness. When he woke, he had a headache. He lay on the hay in the pit. It was late afternoon. It seems the stare of the basilisk is overrated, Fanchon said. Neither of us died, so it had really happened. Not quite, Bink agreed. But I feel a bit dead. As he spoke he realized something that had not quite surfaced before. The basilisk was a magical creature that could do magic. He had been an intelligent cockatrice who had magically stricken an enemy. What did that do to his theory of magic? Well, you put up a good fight, Fanchon was saying. They've already buried that soldier. It is quiet like death in this camp now. Like death. Had that been the meaning of his omen? He had not died, but he had killed without meaning to, in a manner completely foreign to his normal state. Had the omen been fulfilled? Bink sat up, another realization coming. Trent's talent is genuine. We were transformed. We really were. It is genuine. We really were, she agreed somberly. I admit I doubted, but now I believe. He must have changed us back while we were unconscious. Yes. He was only making a demonstration. It was an effective one. It was. She shuddered. Bink, I don't know whether I can take that again. It wasn't just the change. It was, I know. You made a hell of an ugly basilisk. I would make a hell of an ugly anything. But the sheer malignancy, stupidity, and awfulness, those things are foul. To spend the rest of my life like that, I can't blame you, Bink said. But still something nagged at his mind. The experience had been so momentous that he knew it would take a long time for his mind to sift through all its aspects. I didn't think anyone could make me go against my conscience. But this, she put her face into her hands. Bink nodded silently. After a moment he shifted the subject. Did you notice those creatures were male and female? Of course, she said, gaining control of herself now that she had something to orient on. We are male and female. The magician can change our forms but not our sexes, but the basilisk should be neuter. Hatched of eggs laid by roosters, there are no parent basilisks, only roosters. She nodded thoughtfully, catching hold of the problem. You're right. If there are males and females, they should mate and reproduce their own kind. Which means, by definition, they aren't basilisks. A paradox. There must be something wrong with the definition, Bink said. Either there's a lot of superstition about the origins of monsters, or we were not genuine basilisks. We were genuine, she said, grimacing with renewed horror. I'm sure now. For the first time in my life, I'm glad for my human form. Which was quite an admission, for her. That means Trent's magic is all the way real. Bink said. He doesn't just change the form, he really converts things into other things, if you see what I mean. Then the thing that had nagged at his mind before came clear. But if magic fades outside Xanth, beyond the narrow magic band beyond the shield, all we would have to do, would be to go into Mundania, she exclaimed, catching on. In time, we would revert to our proper forms. So it would not be permanent, so his transformation ability is a bluff, even though it is real. He said. He would have to keep us caged right there, or we'd escape and get out of his power. He has to get all the way into Xanth or he really has very little power. No more power than he already has as general of his army, the power to kill. All he can get now is the tantalizing taste of real power, she said. I'll bet he wants to get into Xanth, but meanwhile, we're still in his power. She set out the bricks, catching the limited sunlight. What are you going to do? She asked. If he lets me go, I'll travel on into Mundania. That's where I was headed before I was ambushed. One thing Trent has shown me, it is possible to survive out there. But I'll make sure to note my route carefully. It seems Xanth is hard to find from the other direction. I meant about the shield stone. Nothing. You won't tell him? No, of course not, he said. Now we know his magic can't really hurt us worse than his soldiers can. Some of the terror is gone. Not that it matters. I don't blame you for telling him. She looked at him. Her face was still ugly, but there was something special in it now. You know, you're quite a man, Bink. No, I'm nothing much. I have no magic, you have magic. You just don't know what it is. Same thing, I followed you out here, you know. Her meaning was coming clear. She had heard about him in Xanth, the traveler with no spell. She had known that would be no liability in Mundania. What better match, the man with no magic? The woman with no beauty. Similar liabilities. Perhaps he could get used to her appearance in time. Her other qualities were certainly commendable. Except for one thing, I understand your position, he said. But, if you cooperate with the evil magician, I won't have anything to do with you, even if he makes you beautiful. Not that it matters, you can get your reward in Xanth when he takes over. If he honors his given word this time, you restore my courage, she said. Let's make a break for it. How? The bricks, dummy. They're hard now. As soon as it's dark, we'll make a pile. The grate keeps us in, its door is still locked. A step won't make any difference. If just getting up there were the only problem, I could lift you. There is a difference, she murmured. We pile the bricks, stand on them, and push the whole grate up. It's not anchored. I checked that when they brought us in here. Gravity holds it down. It's heavy, but you're strong. Bink looked up with sudden hope. You could prop it up after I heave. Step by step, until, not so loud, she whispered fiercely. They may still be eavesdropping. But she nodded. You've got the idea. It's not a sure thing, but it's worth a try. And we'll have to make a raid on the store of elixir, so he can't use it even if someone else comes out to tell him where the shield stone is. I've been working it all out, Bink smiled. He was beginning to like her. Chapter 10, Chase. At night they piled up the bricks. Some crumbled, for the scant sunlight had not been sufficient to bake them properly, but on the whole they were surprisingly sturdy. Bink listened carefully for the guards, waiting until they took what they called a break. Then he stepped to the top of the brick pile, braced his hands against the edge of the grate and shoved. As his muscles tightened, he suddenly realized that this was Fanchon's real reason for demanding the privacy curtain of the privy. It had not been to hide her unsightly anatomy, but to hide the bricks, so they would be preserved for this moment, this effort to escape. And he had never caught on. The revelation gave him strength. He shoved hard and the grate rose with surprising ease. Fanchon scrambled up beside him and jammed the privy pot under the lifted edge. Ugh. Maybe some year someone would develop a pot that smelled of roses, but it did the job. It supported the grate as he eased off. Now there was room to scramble out. Bink gave her a boost, then hauled himself up. No guards saw them. They were free. The elixir is on that ship, Fanchon whispered, pointing into the darkness. How do you know that? Bink asked. We passed it on our way to the transformation. It's the only thing that would be guarded so carefully. And you can see the catapult aboard it. She had certainly kept her eyes open. Ugly she might be, but she was smart. He hadn't thought to survey the premises with such an analytic eye. Now, getting that elixir will be a problem, she continued. I think we'd better take the whole ship. Can you sail? I've never been on anything bigger than a rowboat in my life, except maybe Iris's yacht, and that wasn't real. I'd probably get seasick. Me too, she agreed. We're landlubbers. So they'll never look for us there. Come on. Well, it was better than being changed into a cockatrice. They crept down to the beach and entered the water. Bink looked back nervously and saw a light moving toward the pit. Hurry, he whispered. We forgot to put the grate back down, they'll know we're gone right away. At least they were both reasonably good swimmers. They shed their clothing. What had happened to it during the transformations? Again, no explaining the details of magic. Anne stroked silently for the sailboat moored a quarter-mile out. Bink was alarmed by the dark depths of the water beneath him. What type of monsters dwelled in mundane seas? The water was not cold, and the exertion of swimming helped warm him. But gradually Bink tired and felt chilled. Fanchon suffered similarly. The ship had not seemed far, viewed from land, but that had been walking distance. Swimming distance was quite another matter. Then the hue and cry commenced back at the prison pit. Lights flared everywhere, moving around like fireflies but setting no fires. Bink had an infusion of new strength. "We've got to get there fast," he gasped. Fanchon didn't answer. She was too busy swimming. The swim was interminable. It drained strength from Bink, making him become more pessimistic. But at last they came up to the ship. A sailor was standing on the deck, a silhouette in the light of the moon, peering at the shore. Fanchon drew close to Bink. "You go other side," she gasped. "I distract," she had guts. The sailor might put an arrow in her. But Bink stroked laboriously around the keel, moving to the far side. The ship was about 40 feet long, large by Xanth standards. But if any part of what Trent had said about Mundania was true, there were much larger ships there. He reached up and put his fingers on the edge of the hull. He tried to think of the name of this portion of a ship's anatomy, but could not. He hoped there weren't other sailors watching. He had to haul himself up slowly over the gunwale, that was the name, as not to rock the boat. Now Fanchon, with superlative timing, made a clamor, as of someone drowning. The sailors went to the rail, 4 of them in all, and Bink heaved himself up as silently as he could. He scraped, for his muscles felt leaden, unresponsive. His wet body slapped against the deck, and the ship tilted back a bit under his weight, but the sailors stood riveted to the other side, watching the show. Bink got to his feet and slunk up to the mast. The sails were furled, so that it offered scant concealment. They would see him when they turned with their lamps. Well, he would have to act first. He felt ill-equipped to indulge in combat, his arms and feet cold and heavy, but it was necessary. He walked silently up behind the 4, his heart pounding. They were leaning over the rail, trying to see Fanchon, who was still making a considerable commotion. Bink put his left hand against the back of the nearest sailor and caught the man's trouser with his right hand. He heaved hard and suddenly, and the sailor went up and over with a cry of alarm. Bink swung immediately to the next, grabbing and shoving. The man had started to turn toward his companion's exclamations, but too late. Bink heaved, and the sailor went over. Almost over. One hand caught the rail. The sailor clung, twisting around to face inward. Bink knocked at his fingers and finally pried them loose, and the man dropped into the water, but the loss of time and momentum had been crucial. Now the other 2 were upon Bink. One wrapped an arm around Bink's shoulder, trying to choke him, while the other hovered behind. What had Crombie said to do in a situation like this? Bink concentrated and remembered. He grabbed the man, bent his knees, leaned forward, and heaved. It worked beautifully. The sailor sailed over Bink's shoulder and crashed on his back on the deck, but the last one was stepping in, fist swinging. He caught Bink on the side of the head with glancing but numbing force. Bink fell to the deck himself, and the man dove on top of him. To make things worse, Bink saw one of the others climbing back aboard. He put up his feet to hold off his opponent, but this was only partially effective. The burly sailor was pushing him down, pinning him, and the other was about to join in. The standing figure lifted a foot. Bink could not even flinch. His arms were tangled, his body held down. The foot swung and struck the head of Bink's antagonist. The man rolled off Bink with a groan. It was not fun, being kicked in the head. But how had the kicker missed the proper target, at such close range? The lamps had all gone into the water along with their owners, maybe in the dark a mistake. "Help me get him over the edge," Fanchon said. "We've got to secure this ship," and he had mistaken her for a sailor, though she was naked. Well, blame the inadequate light again. Moonlight was pretty, but in a situation like this but the remaining 2 sailors were already rising over the gunwale. Acting on a common impulse, Bink grabbed his erstwhile opponent's shoulders, and Fanchon grabbed his feet. 1, 2, 3 heave, she gasped. They heaved almost together. The man swung up and into his 2 companions. All 3 went over the edge to splash in the sea. Bink hoped they were all lively enough to swim. The 4th one lay on the deck, apparently unconscious. "Pull up the anchor," Fanchon ordered. "I'll get a pole." She ran to the ship's cabin, a lean figure in the moonlight. Bink found the anchor chain and hauled on it. The thing snagged infuriatingly, because he did not know how to make it let go, but finally he got it up. What did you do to this guy? Fanchon demanded, kneeling beside the fallen sailor. I threw him. Crombie showed me how. Crombie? I don't remember, a soldier I met in Xanth. We got caught in a hailstorm, and I was going back after D, but well, it's complicated. Oh yes, you did mention the soldier. She paused. D. You went after her. Why? She had run out into the storm and well, I liked her. Then, to cover up what might have been taken as a slight to his present company, who had shown extreme sensitivity about such things before, he said, what happened to the other sailors? Did they drown? I showed them this, she said, pointing to a wicked-looking boat hook. They swam for shore instead. We'd better get moving. If we can figure out the sail, no. The current is carrying us out. Wind's the wrong way. We just mess it up, trying to handle the sails when we don't know what we're doing. Bink looked across at the other ship. Lights were on it. Those sailors didn't swim ashore, he said. They went next door. They'll be coming after us under sail. They can't, she said. I told you the wind, but now it was unmistakable. The other sail was being spread. They were using the wind. We'd better find that elixir, she said. Yes. He had forgotten about it. But for that, they could have run across the land and been lost in Mundania. But could he have lived with himself, buying his own freedom while leaving Xanth subject to the siege of the evil magician? We'll dump it overboard. No, but I thought, we'll use it as hostage. As long as we have it. They won't close on us. We'll take turns standing on the deck and holding the vial over the sea so they can see us. If anything happens to, beautiful, he exclaimed. I never would have thought of that. First we have to find our hostage. If we guessed wrong about the ship, if they put the catapult on this one and the elixir on the other, then they wouldn't be chasing us, he said. Yes they would. They need the catapult too. And most of all, they need us. They searched the ship. In the cabin was a chained monster of a type Bink had never seen before. It was not large, but quite horrible in other respects. Its body was completely covered with hair, white with black spots, and it had a thin tail, floppy black ears, a small black nose, and gleaming white teeth. Its 4 feet had stubby claws. It snarled viciously as Bink approached, but it was chained by the neck to the wall, its mad leaps cut brutally short by that tether. What is it? Bink asked. Horrified, Fanchon considered. I think it's a werewolf. Now the creature looked halfway familiar. It did resemble a werewolf, fixed in its animal stage. Out here in Mundania, well, it must be related. If it had more heads, it would be like a Cerberus. With only one head, I think it's a dog, Bink gaped. A dog? I think you're right. I've never actually seen a dog before. Not in the flesh. Just pictures. I don't think there are any in Xanth today. There used to be, but they must have migrated out. Through the shield? Bink demanded. Before the shield was set up, of course, though I'd thought there were references to dogs and cats and horses within the past century. I must have misremembered the dates. Well, it seems we have one here now. It looks vicious. It must be guarding the elixir, trained to attack strangers, she agreed. I suppose we'll have to kill it, but it's a rare creature. Maybe the only one left alive today, we don't know that. Dogs might be common in Mundania. But it is rather pretty. Once you get used to it. The dog had quieted down, though it still watched them warily. A small dragon might watch a person that way, Bink thought, if the person were just outside its striking range. With the proper break, the person might come within range. Maybe we could revive the sailor and have him tame it, Bink said. The animal must be responsive to members of this ship's crew. Otherwise they could never get at the elixir. Good idea, she agreed. The sailor had finally recovered consciousness, but he was in no condition to resume the fight. We'll let you go, Fanchon told him, if you tell us how to tame that dog. We don't want to have to kill it, you see. Who, Jennifer? The man asked dazedly. Just speak her name, pat her on the head, and feed her. He lay back. I think my collarbones broke. Fanchon looked at Bink. Can't make him swim, then. Trent may be a monster, but we aren't. She turned back to the sailor. If you will give your word not to interfere with us in any way, we'll help you recover as well as we can. Deal? The sailor didn't hesitate. I can't interfere with you. I can't get up. Deal? This bothered Bink. He and Fanchon sounded just like Trent, offering better terms to a captive enemy in return for his cooperation. Were they any different from the evil magician? Fanchon checked the sailor's body around the shoulders. Yow, he cried, I'm no doctor, she said, but I think you're right. You have a broken bone. Are there any pillows aboard? Listen, the sailor said as she worked on him. He was obviously trying to divert his attention from the pain. Trent's no monster. You called him that, but you're wrong. He's a good leader, he's promised you all the spoils of Xanth. Fanchon asked, with an edge to her voice. No, just farms or jobs for all of us, he said. No killing, no rappin', no loot. Her disbelief was evident, none of that. This ain't the old days, you know. We just protect him and keep order in the territory we occupy. And he'll give us small land grants where nobody's settled yet. He says Xanth's underpopulated. And he'll encourage the local gals to marry us, so we can have families. If there aren't enough, he'll bring in gals from the real world. And meanwhile, he'll transform some smart animals into gals. I thought that was a joke, but after what I hear about those cocks, he grimaced. I mean those Basques, he shook his head and grimaced again, in pain. Keep your head still, Fanchon told him. Too late. It's true about the cockatrice and basilisk, we were them. But animal brides, oh, it wouldn't be so bad, miss. Just temporary, until real gals arrived. If she looks like a gal and feels like a gal, I wouldn't blame her for being a bitch before. I mean, some gals are bitches. What's a bitch? Bink asked. A bitch? You don't know that? The sailor grimaced again, either he was in considerable pain or it was a natural expression. A female dog. Like Jennifer. Hell. If Jennifer had human form, enough, Fanchon muttered. Well, anyway, we'll get homesteads and settle in. And our kids will be magic. I tell you, it's that last that recruited me. I don't believe in magic, understand, or I didn't then, but I remember the fairy tales from when I was a little tyke, about the princess and the frog, and the mountain of glass, and the 3 wishes. Well, look, I was a metalworker for a crooked shop, know what I mean? And I really wanted out of the rat race. Bink shook his head silently. He understood only part of what the sailor was saying, but it did not make Mundania look very good. Stores that were built off balance, crooked. Rats that raced. Bink would want to get out of that culture, too. A chance to have a decent life in the country, the sailor continued, and there was no question about his dedication to his vision. Owning my own land, making good things grow, you know. And my kids knowing magic, real magic. I guess I still don't really believe that part. But even if it's a lie, you know, it's sure nice to think about, but to invade a foreign land, to take what doesn't belong to you, Fanchon said. She broke off, evidently certain that it was pointless to debate that sort of thing with a sailor. He'll betray you the moment he doesn't need you. He's an evil magician, exiled from Xanth. You mean he really can do magic? The man asked with happy disbelief. I figured all this stuff was sleight of hand, you know, when I really thought about it. I mean, I believed some of the time, but he sure as hell can do magic, Bink put in, becoming acclimatized to the sailor's language. We told you how he changed us, never mind about that, Fanchon said. Well, he's still a good leader, the sailor insisted. He told us how he was kicked out 20 years ago because he tried to be king, and how he lost his magic, and married a gal from here and had a little boy. Trent has a family in Mundania. Bink asked, amazed. We don't call our country that. The sailor said. But yes, he had a family. Until this mystery bug went around, some kind of flu, I think, or maybe food poisoning, and they both got it and died. He said science hadn't been able to save them, but magic could have, so he was going back to Magicland. Xanth, you call it. But they'd kill him if he just walked in alone, even if he got by the thing he called a shield. So he needed an army. Fanchon had finished her work and heaved his shoulder up onto a pillow, so they had the sailor as comfortable as was feasible. His shoulder bound up in stray cloths. Bink would have liked to hear more of the man's unique viewpoint. But time had passed, and it was apparent that the other ship was gaining on them. They traced its progress by its sail, which moved laterally, back and forth, zigzagging against the wind, and with each pass it was closer. They had been wrong about the capabilities of ships in adverse wind. How much else were they wrong about? Bink went into the cabin. He was feeling a bit seasick now. But he held it down. Jennifer, he said hesitantly, proffering some of the dog food they had found. The small spotted monster wagged her tail. Just like that, they were friends. Bink screwed up his courage and patted her on the head, and she did not bite him. Then, while she ate, He opened the chest she had guarded so ferociously and lifted out the vial of greenish fluid he found therein, in a carefully padded box. "Victory, miss," the sailor called as Bink emerged with the vial. "The shield." Fanchen looked about nervously. "Is the current carrying us into that?" "Yes, miss. I wouldn't interfere, but if you don't turn this boat soon, we'll all be dead." "I know that shield works, I've seen animals try to go through it and get fried. How can we tell where it is?" she asked. "There's a glimmer." "See?" He pointed with difficulty. Bink peered and saw it. They were drifting toward a curtain of faint luminescence, ghostly white. "The shield," the ship progressed inexorably. "We can't stop it." Fanchen cried. "We're going right through. Throw down the anchor," the sailor said. What else was there to do? The shield was certain death. Yet to stop meant capture by Trent's forces. Even bluffing them back by means of the vial of elixir would not suffice. The ship remained a kind of prison. "We can use the lifeboat," Fanchen said. "Give me the vial." Bink gave it to her, then threw over the anchor. The ship slowly turned as the anchor took hold. The shield loomed uncomfortably close, but so did the pursuing ship. Now it was clear why it was using the wind instead of the current. It was under control, in no danger of drifting into the shield. They lowered the lifeboat. A reflector lamp from the other ship bathed them in its light. Fanchen held the vial aloft. "I'll drop it," she screamed at the enemy. "Hit me with an arrow, the elixir drowns with me." "Give it back," Trent's voice called from the other ship. "I pledge to let you both go free." "Ha," she muttered. "Bink, can you row this boat yourself? I'm afraid to set this thing down while we're in range of their arrows. I want to be sure that no matter what happens to us, they don't get this stuff." "I'll try," Bink said. He settled himself, grabbed the oars, and heaved. One oar cracked into the side of the ship. The other dug into the water. The boat skewed around. "Push off!" Fanchen exclaimed. "You almost dumped me." Bink tried to put the end of one oar against the ship, to push, but it didn't work because he could not maneuver the oar free of its oarlock. But the current carried the boat along until it passed beyond the end of the ship. "We're going into the shield," Fanchen cried, waving the vial. "Row! Row! Turn the boat." Bink put his back into it. The problem with rowing was that he faced backward. He could not see where he was going. Fanchen perched in the stem, holding the vial aloft, peering ahead. He got the feel of the oars and turned the boat, and now the shimmering curtain came into view on the side. It was rather pretty in its fashion, its ghostly glow parting the night, but he recoiled from its horror. "Go parallel to it," Fanchen directed. "The closer we stay, the harder it'll make it for the other ship. Maybe they'll give up the pursuit." Bink pulled on the oars. The boat moved ahead. But he was unused to this particular form of exertion, and not recovered from his fatigue of the swim, and he knew he couldn't keep it up long. "You're going into the shield?" Fanchen cried. Bink looked. The shield loomed closer, yet he was not rowing toward it. "The current," he said, "carrying us sideways." He had naively thought that once he started rowing, all other vectors ceased. "Row away from the shield," she cried. Quickly, he angled the boat, but the shield did not retreat. The current was bearing them on as fast as he could row. To make it worse, the wind was now changing and rising. He was holding even at the moment, but he was tiring rapidly. "I can't keep this up," he gasped, staring at the glow. "There's an island," Fanchen said. "Angle toward it." Bink looked around. He saw a black something cutting the waves to the side. Island? It was no more than a treacherous rock. But if they could anchor to it, he put forth a desperate effort, but it was not enough. A storm was developing. They were going to miss the rock. The dread shield loomed nearer. "I'll help," Fanchen cried. She set down the vial, crawled forward, and put her hands on the oars, opposite his hands. She pushed, synchronizing her efforts with his. It helped. But Bink, fatigued, was distracted. In the erratic moonlight, blotted out intermittently by the thickening fast-moving clouds above, her naked body lost some of its shapelessness and assumed the suggestion of more feminine contours. Shadow and imagination could make her halfway attractive and embarrassed him, because he had no right to think of such things. Fanchen could be a good companion, if only the boat smashed into the rock. It tilted rock or craft or both. "Get hold! Get hold!" Fanchen cried as water surged over the side. Bink reached out and tried to hang on to the stone. It was both abrasive and slippery. A wave broke over him, filling his mouth with its salty spume. Now it was black, the clouds had completed their engulfment of the moon, the elixir. Fanchon cried. I left it in the. She dived for the flooded stem of the boat. Bink, still choking on sea water, could not yell at her. He clung to the rock with his hands, his fingers finding purchase in a crevice, anchoring the boat with his hooked knees. He suffered a foolish vision, if a giant drowning in the ocean grabbed on to the land of Xanth for support. His fingers would catch in the chasm, the gap. Maybe that was the purpose of the gap. Did the tiny inhabitants of this isolated rock resent the crevice that Bink's giant fingers had found? Did they have forget spells to remove it from their awareness? There was a distant flash of lightning. Bink saw the somber mass of ragged stone, no miniature people on it. But there was a glint, as of light reflecting from a knob in the water. He stared at it, but the lightning was long since gone. And he was squinting at the mere memory, trying to make out the surrounding shape. For it had been a highlight from something larger. Lightning flashed again, closer. Bink saw briefly but clearly, it was a toothy reptilian creature. The highlight had been from its malignant eye, a sea monster, he cried, terrified. Fanchon labored at an oar, finally extricating it from its lock. She aimed it at the monster and shoved, thunk. The end of the oar struck the armored green snout. The creature backed off. We've got to get away from here, Bink cried, but as he spoke, another wave broke over them. The boat was lifted and wrenched away from his feet. He put one arm about Fanchon's skinny waist and hung on. It seemed the fingers of his other hand would break, but they remained wedged in the crevice, and he held his position. In the next draught the lightning showed small sail-like projections moving in the water. What were they? Then another monster broke water right beside him. He saw it in the phosphorescence that the complete darkness had attuned his eyes to. It seemed to have a single broad eye across its face, and a round, truncated snout. Huge wattles were at the sides. Bink was transfixed by terror, though he knew that most of the details were really from his imagination. He could only stare at the thing as the lightning permitted, and the lightning confirmed his imagination. It was a hideous monster. Bink struggled with his terror to form some plan of defense. One hand clung to the rock, the other held Fanchon. He could not act. But maybe Fanchon could. He gasped. The monster acted first. It put its hands to its face and lifted the face away. Underneath, was the face of evil magician Trent. You fools have caused enough trouble. Give me the elixir, and I'll have the ship throw us a line. Bink hesitated. He was bone-weary and cold, and knew he could not hold out much longer against storm and current. It was death to stay here. There's a crocodile sniffing around, Trent continued. And several sharks. Those are just as deadly as the mythical monsters you are familiar with. I have repellent, but the current is carrying it away as rapidly as it diffuses into the water, so it's not much help. On top of that, sometimes whirlpools develop around these rocks, especially during storms. We need help now, and I alone can summon it. Give me that vial. Never. Fanchon cried. She dived into the black waves. Trent snapped the mask back over his face and dived after her. As he moved, Bink saw that the magician was naked except for his long sword strapped to a harness. Bink dived after him, not even thinking of what he was doing. They met in a tangle underwater. In the dark and bubbly swirl, there was nothing but mutual mischief. Bink tried to swim to the surface, uncertain as to what foolishness had prompted him to dive here, but sure that he could only drown himself. But someone had a death grip on him. He had to get up, to get his head in air so he could breathe. The water had hold of them all, carrying them around and around. It was the whirlpool, an inanimate funnel monster. It sucked them down, spinning, into the depth of its maw. For the second time Bink felt himself drowning, and this time he knew no sorceress would rescue him. Chapter 11, Wilderness. Bink woke with his face in sand. Around him lay the inert tentacles of a green monster. He groaned and sat up. Bink! Fanchon cried gladly, coming across the beach to him. I thought it was night, he said. You've been unconscious. This cave has magic phosphorescence, or maybe it's mundane phosphorescence, since there was some on the rock, too. But it's much brighter here. Trent pumped the water out of you, but I was afraid. What's this? Bink asked, staring at a green tentacle. A kraken seaweed, Trent said. It pulled us out of the drink, intending to consume us, but the vial of elixir broke and killed it. That's all that saved our lives. If the vial had broken earlier, it would have stopped the kraken from catching us, and we all would have drowned later, and we would already have been eaten. As fortuitous a coincidence of timing as I have ever experienced, the kraken weed. Bink exclaimed. But that's magic. We're back in Xanth, Fanchon said. but... I conjecture that the whirlpool drew us down below the effective level of the shield, Trent said. We passed under it. Perhaps the presence of the elixir helped. A freak accident, and I'm certainly not going to try to reverse that route now. I lost my breathing apparatus on the way in, lucky I got a good dose of oxygen first. We're in Xanth to stay, I guess so, Bink said dazedly. He had gradually become accustomed to the notion of spending the rest of his life in Mundania. It was hard to abandon that drear expectation so suddenly. But why did you save me? Once the elixir was gone, it was the decent thing to do, the magician said. I realize you would not appreciate such a notion from my lips, but I can offer no better rationale at the moment. I never had any personal animus against you, in fact, I rather admire your fortitude and personal ethical code. You can go your way now and I'll go mine, Bink pondered. He was faced with a new, unfamiliar reality. Back in Xanth, no longer at war with the evil magician. The more he reviewed the details, the less sense any of it made. Sucked down by a whirlpool through monster-infested waters, through the invisible but deadly shield, to be rescued by a man-eating plant, which was coincidentally nullified at precisely the moment required to let them drop safely on this beach. No, he said. I don't believe it. Things just don't happen this way. It does seem as if we're charmed, Fanchon said. Though why the evil magician should have been included. Trent smiled. Naked, he was fully as impressive as before. Despite his age, he was a fit and powerful man. It does seem ironic that the evil should be saved along with the good. Perhaps human definitions are not always honored by nature. But I, like you, am a realist. I don't pretend to understand how we got here, but I do not question that we are here. Getting to land may be more problematical, however. We are hardly out of danger yet. Bink looked around the cave. Already the air seemed close. Though he hoped that was his imagination. There seemed to be no exit except the water through which they had come. In one nook was a pile of clean bones, the refuse of the kraken. It began to seem less coincidental. What better place for an ocean monster to operate than at the exit to a whirlpool? The sea itself collected the prey, and most of it was killed on the way in by the shield. The kraken weed had only to sieve the fresh bodies out of the water. And this highly private cave was ideal for leisurely consumption of the largest living animals. They could be deposited here on the beach, and even given food, so that they would remain more or less healthy until the kraken's hunger was sufficient. A pleasant little larder to keep the food fresh and tasty. Any that tried to escape by swimming past the tentacles ugh. So the kraken could have dropped the human trio here, then been hit by the elixir. Instead of split-second timing, it became several-minute timing. Still a coincidence, but a much less extreme one. Fanchon was squatting by the water, flicking dry leaves into it. The leaves had to be from past seasons of the kraken weed. Why it needed them here, with no sunlight, Bink didn't understand. Maybe it had been a regular plant before it turned magic, or its ancestors had been regular and it still had not entirely adapted. Or maybe the leaves had some other purpose. There was a great deal yet to be understood about nature. At any rate, Fanchon was floating the leaves on the water, and why she wasted her time that way was similarly opaque. She saw him looking. I'm tracing surface currents, she said. See, the water is moving that way. There has to be an exit under that wall. Bink was impressed again with her intelligence. Every time he caught her doing something stupid, it turned out to be the opposite. She was an ordinary, if ugly, girl, but she had a mind that functioned efficiently. She had plotted their escape from the pit, and their subsequent strategy, and it had nullified Trent's program of conquest. Now she was at it again. Too bad her appearance fell down, of course, Trent agreed. The kraken can't live in stagnant water, it needs a constant flow. That brings in its food supply and carries away its wastes. We have an exit if it leads to the surface quickly enough, and does not pass through the shield again. Bink didn't like it. Suppose we dive into that current and it carries us a mile underwater before it comes out. We'd drown, my friend, Trent said. I have been pondering that very dilemma. We cannot be rescued by my sailors, because we are obviously beyond the shield. I do not like to gamble on either the current or what we may discover within it. Yet it seems we must eventually do so, for we cannot remain here indefinitely. Something twitched. Bink looked and saw one green tentacle writhing. The kraken's reviving, he exclaimed. It isn't dead, Trent said. The elixir has thinned out in the current and dissipated. The magic is returning. I had thought that concentration would be fatal to a magic creature. But apparently not. Fanchon watched the tentacles. Now others were quivering. I think we'd better get out of here, she said. Soon, but we don't dare plunge into the water without knowing where it goes, Bink objected. We must be well below the surface. I'd rather stay here and fight than drown. I propose we declare a truce between us until we get free, Trent said. The elixir is gone, and we cannot go back the way we came from Mundania. We shall probably have to cooperate to get out of here and in the present situation. We really have no quarrel, Fanchon didn't trust him. So we help you get out so then the truce ends and you change us into gnats. Since we're inside Xanth, we'll never be able to change back again, Trent snapped his fingers. Stupid of me to forget. Thank you for reminding me. I can use my magic now to get us out. He looked at the quivering green tentacles. Of course, I'll have to wait until all the elixir is gone, for it voids my magic, too. That means the Kraken will be fully recovered. I can't transform it, because its main body is too far away, the tentacles lifted. Bink, dive for it. Fanchon cried. We don't want to be caught between the Kraken and the evil magician. She plunged into the water, the issue had been forced. She was right, the Kraken would eat them or the magician would transform them. Right now, while the lingering elixir blunted both threats, was the time to escape. Still, he would have hesitated if Fanchon had not already taken action. If she drowned, there would be no one on his side. Bink charged across the sand, tripped over a tentacle, and sprawled. Reacting automatically, the tentacle wrapped itself around his leg. The leaves glued themselves to his flesh with little sucking noises. Trent drew his sword and strode toward him. Bink grabbed a handful of sand and threw it at the magician, but it was ineffective. Then Trent's sword slashed down and severed the tentacle. You are in no danger from me, Bink, the magician said. Swim. If you wish. Bink scrambled up and dived into the water, taking a deep breath. He saw Fanchon's feet kicking ahead of him as she swam down, and saw the dark tube of the nether exit. It terrified him, and he balked, his head popped through the surface. There was Trent, standing on the beach, parrying the converging tentacles with his sword. Fighting off the coils of the monster, the man was the very picture of heroism. Yet the moment the combat was over, Trent would be a more dangerous monster than the Kraken. Bink decided. He took a new breath and dived again. This time he stroked right into the somber eye, and felt the current take him. Now there was no turning back, the tunnel opened out almost immediately into another glowing cavern. Bink had gained on Fanchon, and their heads broke the surface almost together. Probably she had been more cautious about navigating the exit, heads turned their way. Human heads, on human torsos, very nice feminine ones. Their faces were elfin, their tresses flowing in magical iridescence over slender bare shoulders and perfectly erect breasts. But the lower quarters merged into fishes' tails. These were mermaids. What are you doing in our cave? One of the maids cried indignantly. Just passing through, Bink said. Naturally, mermaids spoke the common language of Xanth. He would not have thought anything of it, had Trent not remarked on how Xanth language merged with all mundane languages. Magic operated in so many ways. Tell us the shortest way to the surface. That way, one said, pointing left. That way, another said. Pointing right. No, that way, a third cried, pointing straight up. There was a burst of girlish laughter. Several mermaids plunged into the water, tails flashing, and swam toward Bink. In a moment he was surrounded. Up close, the creatures were even prettier than from afar. Each one had a perfect complexion, resulting from the natural action of the water, and their breasts floated somewhat, making them seem fuller. Maybe he had been exposed to Fanchon too long. The sight of all this loveliness gave him strange sensations of excitement and nostalgia. If he could grab them all at once, but no, they were mermaids, not his type at all. They paid no attention to Fanchon. He's a man, one cried, meaning Bink was human, not merman. Look at his split legs. No tail at all. Suddenly they were diving under to view his legs. Bink, naked, found this distinctly awkward. They began to put their hands on him, kneading the unfamiliar musculature of his legs, a great curiosity to them. Yet why weren't they looking at Fanchon's legs too? There seemed to be more mischief than curiosity here. Trent's head broke the water behind them. Mermaids, he commented. We'll get nothing from them, so it seemed. It also seemed that the magician could not be avoided. I think we'd better make the truce, Bink said to Fanchon. We have to extend some trust sometime. She looked at the mermaids, then at Trent. Very well, she said ungraciously. For what it's worth, which isn't much, a sensible decision, Trent said. Our long-range objectives may differ, but our short-range one matches: survival. See, here come the Tritons." As he spoke, a group of mermen appeared, swimming in from another passage. This seemed to be a labyrinth of caves and water-filled apertures. "Ho!" a Triton cried, brandishing his trident. "Skewer!" the mermaids screamed playfully and dived out of sight. Bink avoided Fanchon's gaze. The ladies had been having entirely too much fun with him, and obviously not because of his split legs. "Too many to fight," Trent said. "The elixir is gone. With your acquiescence. Under our truce, I will change you both into fish, or perhaps reptiles, so that you can escape. However, how will we change back?" Fanchon demanded. "That is the key. I cannot change myself. Therefore you will have to rescue me or remain transformed. So we shall survive together, or suffer apart." "Fair enough." She looked at the Tritons, who were swimming determinedly toward the three, surrounding them, tridents raised. They did not look at all playful. This was obviously a gang of bullies. Showing off for the applauding spectators, the mermaids, who had now reappeared on shore, taking time to put on a flashy show. "Why not change them into fish? That would abate the immediate threat." "Could I get them all in time?" Trent agreed. "But it still would not free us from the cave. I suspect we shall have to resort to magic on ourselves at some point, regardless. And we are intruders in their cave. There is a certain proprietary ethic." "All right," she cried, as a Triton heaved his three-pointed fork. "Do it your way." Suddenly she was a monster, one of the worst Bink had seen. She had a huge greenish sheath around her torso, from which arms, legs, head, and tail projected. Her feet were webbed, and her head was like that of a serpent. The Triton's fork struck the Fanchon monster's shell and bounced off. Suddenly Bink saw the sense of this transformation. This monster was invulnerable. "Sea turtle," Trent murmured. "Mundane. Harmless, normally, but the merfolk don't know that. I've made a study of non-magical creatures, and have developed much respect for them." Oops. Another Triton was flying, then Bink was also a sea turtle. Suddenly he was completely comfortable in the water, and he had no fear of the pronged spears. If one came at his face, he would simply pull in his head. It would not retract all the way, but the armor of the shell around it would intercept almost anything. Something tugged at his carapace. Bink started dive, trying to dislodge it, then realized, in his reptilian brain, that this was something that had to be tolerated. Not a friend, but an ally for now. So he dived, but allowed the dragging weight to persist. Bink stroked slowly but powerfully for the underwater passage. The other turtle had already entered it. Bink didn't worry about air. He knew he could hold his breath for as long as it took. It did not take long. This passage slanted up to the surface. Bink could see the moon as he broke through. The storm had abated. Abruptly he was human again, and swimming was harder. "Why did you change me back?" he asked. "We weren't to shore yet. When you are a turtle, you have the brain of a turtle, and the instincts of a turtle," Trent explained. "Otherwise you would not be able to survive as a turtle. Too long, and you might forget you ever were a man. If you headed out to sea, I might not be able to catch you, and so would never be able to change you back." Justin Tree retained his human mind, Bink pointed out. "Justin Tree, one of the men you changed into trees, in the North Village. His talent was throwing his voice. Oh, I remember now. He was a special case. I made him into a sapient tree, really a man in tree form, not a true tree. I can do that when I put my mind to it. For a tree it can work. But a turtle needs turtle reflexes to deal with the ocean." Bink didn't follow all that, but he didn't care to debate it. Obviously cases differed. Then Fanchon reappeared in human form. "Well. You honored the truce," she said grudgingly. "I didn't really think you would. Reality must intrude sometime," Trent said. "What do you mean by that?" she demanded. "I said, we are not out of danger yet. I believe that is a sea serpent on its way." Bink saw the huge head, and there was no question, the monster had seen them. It was big, the head was a yard across. "Maybe the rocks," Bink cried, orienting on the outcropping that marked the exit from the Triton's cave. "That thing's a huge long snake," Fanchon said. "It could reach right down into the cave, or coil right around the rocks. We can't escape it in this form. I could change you into poisonous jellyfish that the serpent would not eat," Trent said. "But you might get lost in the shuffle. It also may not be wise to be transformed more than once a day. I have not been able to verify this during my exile, for obvious reasons, but I am concerned that your systems may suffer a shock each time, besides which, the monster could still eat you," Fanchon said. "You have a very quick mind," Trent agreed equably. Therefore, I shall have to do something I dislike. Transform the monster. You don't want to transform the sea serpent? Bink asked, surprised. The thing was now quite close, its small red eyes fixed on the prey, saliva dripped from its giant teeth. It is merely an innocent creature going about its business, Trent said. We should not enter its waters if we do not wish to participate in its mode of existence. There is a balance of nature, whether magical or mundane, that we should hesitate to interfere with. You have a weird sense of humor, Fanchon said sourly. But I never claimed to understand the nuances of evil magic. If you really want to protect its lifestyle, transform it into a little fish until we get to shore, then transform it back, and hurry. Bink cried. The thing was now looming over them, orienting on its specific targets. That would not work, Trent said. The fish would swim away and be lost. I must be able to identify the particular creature I mean to transform, and it must be within 6 feet of me. However, your suggestion has merit. 6 feet, Bink said. We'll be inside it before we get that close. He was not trying to be funny. The monster's mouth was much longer than it was wide, so that as it opened to its full aperture the upper front teeth were a good 12 feet from the lower teeth. Nevertheless, I must operate within my limits, Trent said, unperturbed. The critical region is the head. The seat of identity. When I transform that, the rest naturally follows. If I tried it when only the tail was within range, I would botch the job. So when it tries to take me in its mouth, it comes into my power. What if it goes for one of us first? Fanchon demanded. Suppose we're more than 6 feet from you, I suggest you arrange to be within that radius, Trent said dryly. Hastily Bink and Fanchon splashed closer to the evil magician. Bink had the distinct impression that even if Trent had had no magic, they would have been in his power. He was too self-assured, too competent in his tactics. He knew how to manage people. The sea monster's body convulsed. Its head struck down, teeth leading. Spittle sprayed out from it in obscene little clouds. Fanchon screamed hysterically. Bink felt an instant and pervading terror. That sensation was becoming all too familiar. He simply was no hero, but as the awful jaws closed on them, the sea serpent vanished. In its place fluttered a glowing, brightly colored insect. Trent caught it neatly in one hand and set it on his own hair, where it perched quiveringly. A lovebug, Trent explained. They are not good flyers, and they hate water. This one will stay close until we emerge from the sea. Now the three swam for shore. It took them some time, for the sea remained choppy and they were tired, but no other creatures bothered them. Apparently no lesser predators intruded on the fishing territory of the sea monster. An understandable attitude, but probably within hours a host of aggressive forms would converge if the sea monster did not return. As Trent had remarked, there was always a balance of nature. The phosphorescence became stronger in the shallows. Some of it was from glowing fish, flashing in colors to communicate with their respective kinds. Most of it was from the water itself. Washes of pale green, yellow, orange magic, of course, but for what purpose? There was so much Bink saw, wherever he went, that he did not understand. At the bottom he saw shells, some lighted around the fringes, some glowing in patterns. A few vanished as he passed over them. Whether they had become truly invisible or merely doused their lights he could not tell. Regardless, they were magic, and that was familiar. Belatedly he realized that he was glad to be back among the familiar threats of Xanth. Dawn was coming as they reached the beach. The sun pushed up behind the clouds over the jungle and finally burst through to bounce its shafts off the water. It was a thing of marvelous beauty. Bink clung to that concept, because his body was numb with fatigue. His brain locked onto the torture of moving limbs, over and over, on and on. At last he crawled upon the beach. Fanchon crawled beside him. Don't stop yet, she said. We must seek cover, lest other monsters come, from the beach or jungle. But Trent stood knee-deep in the surf, his sword dangling from his handsome body. He was obviously not as tired as they were. Return, friend, he said, flicking something into the sea. The sea monster reappeared, its serpentine convolutions much more impressive in the shallow water. Trent had to lift his feet and splash back out of the way, lest he be crushed by a hugely swinging coil. But the monster was not looking for trouble now. It was extremely disgruntled. It gave a single honk of rage or of anguish or of mere amazement and thrashed its way toward deeper pastures. Trent walked up the beach. It is not fun to be a defenseless love bug when you are accustomed to being the king of the sea, he said. I hope the creature does not suffer a nervous breakdown. He was not smiling. There was something funny, Bink thought, about a man who liked monsters that well. But of course Trent was the evil magician of the contemporary scene. The man was strangely handsome, mannerly, and erudite, possessed of strength, skill, and courage, but his affinities were to the monsters more than to the men. It would be disastrous to ever forget that Humphrey, the good magician, was an ugly little gnome in a forbidding castle, selfishly using his magic to enrich himself, while Trent was the epitome of hero material. The sorceress Iris had seemed lovely and sexy, but was in fact nondescript. Humphrey's good qualities were manifest in his actions. Once a person really got to know him. But Trent, so far, had seemed good in both appearance and deed, at least on the purely personal level. If Bink had met him for the first time in the Kraken's cave and hadn't known the man's evil nature, he would never have guessed it. Now Trent strode across the beach, seeming hardly tired despite the grueling swim. The nascent sunlight touched his hair, turning it bright yellow. He looked in that instant like a god, all that was perfect in man. Again Bink suffered fatigued confusion. Trying to reconcile the man's appearance and recent actions with what he knew to be the man's actual nature, and again finding it so challenging as to be virtually impossible. Some things just had to be taken on faith. I've got to rest, to sleep, Bink muttered. I can't tell evil from good right now. Fanchon looked toward Trent. I know what you mean, she said, shaking her head so that her ratty hair shifted its wet tangles. Evil has an insidious way about it, and there is some evil in all of us that seeks to dominate. We have to fight it, no matter how tempting it becomes. Trent arrived. We seem to have made it, he said cheerfully. It certainly is good to be back in Xanth, by whatever freak of fortune. Ironic that you, who sought so ardently to prevent my access, instead facilitated it. Ironic, Fanchon agreed dully. I believe this is the coast of the central wilderness region, bounded on the north by the Great Gap. I had not realized we had drifted so far south, but the contour of the land seems definitive. That means we are not yet out of trouble. Bink's in exile, you're banished, and I'm ugly, Fanchon muttered. We'll never be out of trouble. Nevertheless, I believe it would be expedient to extend our truce until we are free of the wilderness, the magician said. Did Trent know something Bink didn't? Bink had no magic, so he would be prey to all the sinister spells of the deep jungle. Fanchon had no apparent magic. Strange, she claimed her exile had been voluntary, not forced, yet if she really had no magic she should have been banished too. Anyway, she would have a similar problem. But Trent, with his skills with sword and spell, he should have no reason to fear this region. Fanchon had similar doubts. As long as you're with us, we're in constant danger of being transformed into toads. I can't see that the wilderness is worse. Trent spread his hands. I realize you do not trust me, and perhaps you have reason. I believe your security and mine would be enhanced if we cooperated a little longer, but I shall not force my company on you. He walked south along the beach. He knows something, Bink said. He must be leaving us to die. So he can be rid of us without breaking his word. Why should he care about his word? Fanchon asked. That would imply he is a man of honor. Bink had no answer. He crawled to the shade and concealment of the nearest tree and collapsed in the downy sward. He had been unconscious during part of the last night, but that was not the same as sleep. He needed genuine rest. When he woke it was high noon and he was fixed in place. There was no pain, only some itching, but he couldn't lift his head or hands. They were fastened to the ground by myriad threads, as if the very lawn had, oh, no. In the numbness of fatigue, he had been so careless as to lie in a bed of carnivorous grass. The root blades had grown up into his body, infiltrating it so slowly and subtly that it had not disturbed his sleep, and now he was caught. Once he had happened on a patch of the stuff near the north village with an animal skeleton on it. The grass had consumed all the flesh. He had wondered how any creature could have been so stupid as to be trapped by such a thing. Now he knew, he was still breathing, therefore he could still yell. He did so with a certain gusto. Help! There was no response. Fanchon, he cried. I'm tied down. The grass is eating me up. Actually that was an exaggeration. He was not hurt, merely bound to the ground. But the tendrils continued to grow into him, and soon they would start to feed. Drawing the life proteins from his flesh, still nothing. He realized she would not or could not help him. Probably something had put a sleep spell on her. It was obvious, in retrospect, that there were plenty of deadly threats right here at the edge of the beach. She must have fallen into another. She might be dead already. Help! Anybody! He screamed desperately. That was another mistake. All around him, in the forest and along the beach, things were stirring. He had advertised his helplessness. And now they were coming to take advantage of it. Had he struggled with the grass in silence, he might have managed in time to work his way free. He had awakened before it was ready for the kill, luckily. Maybe he had tried to turn over in his sleep, and his body had objected to the resistance strongly enough to throw off the stasis spell the grass was applying. If he struggled and failed, his demise at least would have been fairly comfortable, just a slow sinking into eternal sleep. Now by his noise he had summoned much less comfortable menaces. He could not see them, but he could hear them. From the nearby tree came a rustle, as of meat-eating squirrels. From the beach came a scrape, as of hungry acid crabs. From the sea came a horrible kind of splashing, as of a small sea monster who had sneaked into the territory of the big sea monster Trent had transformed. Now this little one struggled to get out of the water and cross to the prey before it was gone. But the most dreadful sound of all was the pound 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 of the footfalls of something deep in the forest. Large and far away but moving extremely rapidly. A shadow fell on him. "Hi!" a shrill voice cried. It was a harpy, cousin to the one he had met on the way back to the North Village. She was every bit as ugly, smelly, and obnoxious, and now she was dangerous. She descended slowly, her talons reaching down, twitching. The other harpy had seen him healthy, so had stayed well out of reach, though she might have descended had he actually drunk from the spring of love. Ugh! This one saw him helpless. She had a human face and human breasts. So was in that sense female, like the mermaids. But in lieu of arms she had great greasy wings, and her body was that of a gross bird. And she was a dirty bird. Not only were her face and breasts grotesquely shaped, grime was caked on them. It was a wonder she could fly at all. Bink had not had the opportunity or desire to appreciate the qualities of the prior harpy at close range. Now he had a really excellent nether view. Double ack. The mermaids had represented much that was lovely in the female form. This harpy was the ugly aspect. She made Fanchon look halfway decent in comparison. At least Fanchon was clean. She dropped on him, claws clutching and unclutching in air, in anticipation of the glob of entrails they were about to rip out of his exposed gut. Some of the nails were broken and jagged. He caught the odor of her, a stink like none he remembered. "Oh, you big handsome hunk of meat," she screeched. "You look good enough to eat. I can hardly choose what to take first." And she burst into maniacal laughter. Bink, absolutely horrified, put forth the supreme effort of his life and wrenched one arm free of the grass. Little roots trailed from it, and the separation was painful. He was lying partly on his side, one cheek anchored, so he had a very limited field of vision, but his ears continued to bring him the dreadful news of the threats about him. He struck at the harpy, scaring her off for the moment. She was of course a coward, her character matched her appearance, her wings fluttered heavily. A soiled feather drifted down. "Oh, you naughty boy," she screeched. She seemed to be unable to converse in anything less than a screech, her voice was so harsh as to be almost incomprehensible. "I'll guzzle your gizzard for that." And she emitted her horrible cackle again, but now a shadow fell on Bink, from something he could not see, but the outline was awful. He heard heavy breathing, as of some great animal, and smelled its carrion-coated breath, which for the moment overrode the stench of the harpy. It was the thing from the sea, its feet dragging as it hunched forward. It sniffed him and the other creatures stopped moving in, afraid to stand up to this predator, all except the harpy. She was ready to heap vilification on anything, from the safety of the air. "Get away, Argus," she screeched. "He's mine, all mine, especially his gizzard." And she dropped down again, forgetting Bink's free arm. For once Bink didn't mind. He could fight off the dirty bird, but this other thing was too much for him. Let her interfere all she wanted, the unseen thing snorted and leaped, passing right over Bink's body with amazing agility. Now he saw it, body and tail of a large fish, for stout short legs terminating in flippers, tusked head of a boar, no neck. 3 eyes were set along its torso, the middle one set lower than the others. Bink had never seen a monster quite like this before, a land-walking fish. The harpy flew up out of the way just in time, narrowly missing being gored by the thing's semicircular horns. Another stinking feather fell. She screeched some really disgusting insults in her ire, and let fly with a gooey dropping, but the monster ignored her and turned to concentrate on Bink. It opened its mouth, and Bink made a fist to punch it in the snout for what little good that might do when abruptly it paused, gazing balefully over Bink's shoulder. "Now you'll get it, Argus," the harpy screeched gleefully. Even a fishy lout like you can't ignore catoblepas. Bink had never heard of either Argus or catoblepas. But another quake of deep misgiving went through him. He felt the muzzle of the hidden monster nudge him. It was oddly soft, but such was its power that it ripped him half out of the grass. Then the pig snout Argus charged, furious that its meal should be taken away. Bink dropped flat again, letting the slimy flippers pass over him and their impact dislodged more of his body. He was getting free, the two brutes collided. Monsters, the harpy screeched, hovering overhead. In her excitement over this mischief she let fall another large squishy dropping, which just missed Bink's head. If only he had a rock to throw at her, he sat up. One leg remained anchored but now he had anchorage to rip out of the clutch of the demon weed. It didn't even hurt this time. He looked at the battling monsters and saw the snake-like hair of the catawlepas twined around the head of the Argus, gripping it by horns, ears, scales, and eyeballs, anything available. The body of the catawlepas was covered with reptilian scales. From its gorgon head to its cloven hooves, invulnerable to the attack of the Argus. In overall shape it was like any quadruped, not all that remarkable, but that deadly writhing prehensile head hair, what a horror, had he really wanted to return to magic Xanth. He had so conveniently forgotten its uglier aspect. Magic had as much evil as good. Maybe Mundania would really have been better. Fools, the harpy cried, seeing Bink loose. He's getting away. But the monsters were now enmeshed in their own struggle. And paid her no attention. No doubt the winner would feast on the loser, and Bink would be superfluous. She darted down at Bink, forgetting all caution. But he was on his feet now, and able to fight. He reached up and caught her by one wing, trying to get his hands around her scrawny throat. He would gladly have strangled her, in a sense strangling all the meanness of Xanth. But she squawked and fluttered so violently that all he got was a handful of gummy feathers. Bink took advantage of his luck and ran away from the fray. The harpy fluttered after him for a moment, screeching such hideously foul insults that his ears burned, but soon gave up. She had no chance of overcoming him by herself. Harpies were basically carrion feeders and thieves, not hunters. It was their fashion to snatch food from the mouths of others. There was now no sign of the other creatures that had rustled and scraped toward him. They too were predators only of the helpless. Where was Fanchon? Why hadn't she come to help him? She surely must have heard his cries for help if she still lived. There was no way she could have been unaware of the recent fracas. So this must mean, no. She had to be somewhere. Maybe down by the sea, catching fish, out of hearing. She had been invaluable during the past 2 days, and unswervingly loyal to the welfare of Xanth. Without her he could never have escaped the power of the evil magician. For intelligence and personality she had it all over the other girls he had met. Too bad she wasn't. He saw her, resting against a tree. Fanchon, he cried gladly. Hello, Bink, she said, now his worry and speculation translated into ire. Didn't you see me being attacked by those monsters? Didn't you hear? I heard, she said quietly. Bink was baffled and resentful. Why didn't you help me? You could at least have grabbed a stick or thrown rocks. I was almost eaten alive. I'm sorry, she said. He took another step toward her. You're sorry. You just rested here doing nothing and, he cut off, losing the words to continue. Maybe if you moved me from the tree. She said, I'll dump you in the sea, he cried. He strode up to her, leaned over to grab her roughly by the arm, and felt a sudden wash of weakness. Now he understood. The tree had put a lethargy spell on her, and was starting in on him. As with the carnivorous grass, it took time to take full effect. She must have settled here to sleep, as careless in her fatigue as he had been in his, and was now far gone. There was no actual discomfort to alert potential prey, just a slow, insidious draining of vitality. Of strength and will, until it all was gone. Very similar to the grass, actually, only this was less tangible. He fought it off. He squatted beside her, sliding his arms under her back and legs. He really wasn't too weak, yet, if he acted fast. He started to lift her and discovered that his squatting posture had given him a false sense of well-being. He could not raise her up. In fact, he wasn't sure he could stand alone. He just wanted to lie down and rest a moment. No. That would be the end. He dared not yield to it. Sorry I yelled at you, he said. I didn't realize what you were in. That's all right, Bink. Take it easy. She closed her eyes. He let go of her and backed away on his hands and knees. Goodbye, she said listlessly, reopening one eye. She was almost done for. He took hold of her feet and pulled. Another surge of weakness came, making the job seem impossible. It was as much emotional as physical. There was no way he could haul her weight. He tried anyway. His stubbornness prevailing over even this magic. But he failed. She was too heavy for him here. He backed farther away and as he left the environs of the tree his energy and will returned. But now she was beyond his reach. He stood up and took another step toward her and lost his strength again, so that he fell to the ground. He would never make it this way. Again he hauled himself back, sweating with the effort of concentration. Were he less stubborn, he would not have gotten this far. "I can't get you out, and I'm only wasting time," he said apologetically. "Maybe I can loop you with a rope." But there was no rope. He walked along the trees of the edge of the jungle and spied a dangling vine. That would do nicely if he could get it loose. He grabbed it in one hand and screamed. The thing writhed in his grasp and looped about his wrist, imprisoning it. More vines dropped from the tree, swinging toward him. This was a land kraken, a variant of the tangle tree. He was still being fatally careless, walking directly into traps that should never have fooled him. Bink dropped, yanking on the vine with his full weight. It stretched to accommodate him, twining more tightly about his arm. But now he spied a pointed bit of bone on the ground, remnant of prior prey. He swept it up with his free hand and poked at the vine with it, puncturing it. Thick orange sap welled out. The whole tree shivered. There was a high keening of pain. Reluctantly the vine loosened, and he drew his arm free. Another close call. He ran on down the beach, searching for whatever would help him. Maybe a sharp-edged stone, to cut off a vine. No. The other vines would get him. Give up that idea. Maybe a long pole. No, similar problem. This peaceful-seeming beach was a morass of danger, really coming alive. Anything and everything was suspect. Then he saw a human body, Trent, sitting cross-legged on the sand, looking at something. It seemed to be a colorful gourd. Maybe he was eating it. Bink paused. Trent could help him. The magician could change the fatigued tree into a salamander and kill it, or at least render it harmless. But Trent himself was a greater long-term threat than the tree. Which should he choose? Well, he would try to negotiate. The known evil of the tree might not be as bad as the uncertain evil of the magician, but it was more immediate. "Trent," he said hesitantly. The man paid him no attention. He continued to stare at his gourd. He did not actually seem to be eating it. What, then, was its fascination? Bink hesitated to provoke the man, but he did not know how long he could afford to wait. Fanchon was slowly dying. At what point would she be too far gone to be revived, even if rescued from the tree? Some risk had to be taken. "Magician Trent," he said, more firmly. "I think we should extend the truce. Fanchon is caught," and he stopped, for the man was still ignoring him. Bink's fear of the magician began to change, much as had his attitude toward Fanchon when he thought she was malingering. It was as if the charge of emotion had to be spent one way or another, whatever the cost. "Listen, she's in trouble," he snapped. "Are you going to help or aren't you?" Still Trent paid no attention. Bink, still weary from the rigors of the night and unnerved by his recent experiences, suffered a lapse of sanity. "Damn it, answer me," he cried, knocking the gourd from the magician's hands. The thing flew 6 feet, landing in the sand and rolling. Trent looked up. There was no sign of anger in his countenance, just mild surprise. "Hello, Bink," he said. "What is your concern?" "My concern?" Bink cried. "I told you 3 times, Trent looked at him, puzzled. "I did not hear you." The magician paused thoughtfully. "In fact, I did not see you arrive. I must have been sleeping, though I had not intended to. You were sitting here looking at the gourd," Bink said hotly. "Now I remember. I saw it lying on the beach, and it looked intriguing." He broke off, glancing at Shadow. "By the sun, that was an hour ago. Where did the time go?" Bink realized that something was amiss. He went to pick up the gourd. "Hold!" Trent barked. "That's hypnotic." Bink stopped in place. "What, hypnotic?" "That's a mundane term, meaning it puts you into a trance, a walking sleep. It usually takes some time to do, but of course a magic spell hypnosis could be instant. Don't look too closely at the gourd. Its pretty colors must be intended to attract the eye. Then it has, yes, I remember now, a peephole. A single glance into its fascinating innards becomes eternal. Very nice device, but what's the point?" Bink asked, averting his gaze. "I mean, a gourd can't eat a man, but the gourd vine might," Trent pointed out. "Or it may be that a quiescent living body might be excellent food for its seeds to grow on. There are wasps in Mundania that sting other creatures, stunning them, and lay their eggs in the bodies. We can be sure it makes some sort of sense." Still Bink was bemused. "How is it that you, a magician?" "Magicians are human too, Bink. We eat, sleep, love, hate, and err. I am as vulnerable to magic as you are." I merely have a more potent weapon with which to protect myself. If I wanted to be entirely secure, I would lock myself within a stone castle, like my friend Humphrey. My chances of survival in this wilderness would be greatly enhanced by the presence of 1 or 2 alert, loyal companions. This is why I proposed the extension of our truce, and I still feel it is a good idea. It is apparent that I need help, even if you don't. He looked at Bink. Why did you help me, just now? Bink was ashamed to admit the accidental nature of that assistance. I think we should extend the truce. Excellent. Does Fanchon agree? She needs help now. She is enthralled to a lethargy tree, oh ho. Then I shall repay your favor by rescuing the damsel. Then we shall talk of truce. And Trent jumped up. On the way up the beach, Bink pointed out the vine tree, and Trent whipped out his sword and neatly lopped off a length of vine. Again Bink was reminded of the skill this man had with his physical weapon. If Trent's magic were taken away entirely, he would still be dangerous. In fact, he had risen to the generalship of an army. In Mundania, the vine twisted into shuddering convolutions like a dying serpent, oozing orange sap from the end, but it was now harmless. The tree keened again, cowed. Bink almost felt sorry for it. They took this vine to Fanchon, looped it about her foot, and hauled her unceremoniously away from the tree. So simple with the right equipment. Now, Trent said briskly as Fanchon slowly recovered her vital energy. I propose an extended truce between us, until we 3 escape the wilderness of Xanth. We seem to have problems separately. This time Fanchon acquiesced. Chapter 12, Chameleon. The first thing Fanchon did when she recovered was fetch the magic gourd Bink had told her about. This could be useful, she said, wrapping it in a great leaf from a blanket plant. Now we must plan the best route out of here, Trent said. I believe we are south of the chasm, so that will balk us if we go north, unless we remain on the coast. I don't think that is wise. Bink remembered his experience crossing the chasm at the other side. No, we don't want to stay on the beach. He agreed. The sorceress Iris had complicated things there, but there could be equivalent menaces here. Our alternative is to cut inland, Trent said. I am not familiar with this specific locale, but I believe Humphrey was building a castle due east of here. He completed it, Fanchon said. Fine, Bink said. You can change us into big birds, maybe rocks, and we'll carry you there. Trent shook his head negatively. This is not feasible, but you changed us before, and we helped you. We made the truce, we wouldn't drop you, Trent smiled. It is not a question of trust, Bink. I trust you, I have no question at all about your basic integrity, or Fanchon's. But we are in a peculiar circumstance. Fancy the evil magician paying a call on the good magician. Fanchon said. What a scene that would make. No, you would be disappointed, Trent said. Humphrey and I have always gotten along well. We leave each other alone professionally. I should be happy to meet him again. But he would be obliged to convey the news of my return to Xanth to the king, and once he knew my general whereabouts he would use his magic to keep track of me. Yes, I see the problem, she said. No sense tipping your hand to the enemy. But we could fly somewhere else. We can fly nowhere, Trent insisted. I cannot afford to advertise my presence in Xanth, and neither can you. That's right, Bink agreed. We're exiles. And the penalty for violating exile is death, Fanchon finished. I never thought we were all in trouble. If you had forgotten such details 2 days ago, Trent observed wryly, we would not be here now. Fanchon looked unusually sober, as if there were some special significance to the remark. Oddly, the expression made her look less ugly than usual. Probably, Bink thought, he was merely getting used to her. What are we going to do? Bink asked. The whirlpool brought us in under the shield. We've already agreed we can't go back that way. We can't stay here on the beach, and we can't let the citizens know we're back. Even though we entered only by freak accident, we'll have to conceal our identities, Fanchon decided. There are places in Xanth where we would be unknown. That doesn't sound like much of a life, Bink said. Always in hiding, and if anyone asked Magician Humphrey where we were, who'd do that? Fanchon demanded. 1 year's service just to check up on someone in exile, that is our only present margin of security, Trent said. The fact that Humphrey will not bother to cheek without a potential fee. However, we can worry about such things after we escape the wilderness. Perhaps by then some new avenues will have appeared. I can change you into unrecognizable forms, if necessary, and camouflage myself. It may all prove to be academic, because they might never make it through the wilderness, Bink thought. They traveled along the beach until they found a region of sparse forest and field that seemed less hazardous than the rest. They spaced themselves out somewhat whenever anything dangerous appeared. so that they would not all be caught together. The selection worked well enough. At first the magic they encountered was largely innocuous, as if the concentration were all at the beach. There were spells designed to make passing animals sheer off, or color shows whose purpose was unclear. Bink had been through on his trip to the good magician's castle. Maybe the wilderness was overrated. Fanchon spotted a fabric plant and efficiently fashioned togas for them all. The men tolerated this with good humor, having become accustomed to nudity. Had Fanchon been a provocatively proportioned woman, there might have been more reason and less desire for bodily concealment. Still, Bink remembered how she had professed modesty in the prison pit so as to gain a private section in which to hide the bricks. She probably had her reasons this time, too. There were several patches of spellcast coldness, and one of heat. The clothing would have helped protect against these, but they were easy to avoid. The assorted carnivorous trees were readily spotted and bypassed. Staying off attractive paths was second nature to them all now. One region was distinctly awkward, however. It was dry and sandy, with little apparent nutrient in the soil, yet it was covered by luxuriant waist-high broad-leaved plants. The region seemed harmless, so they strode straight through the center. Then all three travelers felt a sudden and almost uncontrollable call of nature. They had to scatter, barely getting separated in time to perform. These were very practical plants, Bink abruptly realized. Their spells compelled passing animals to deposit nutritious fluids and solids on the soil, greatly promoting plant growth. Fertilizer magic. Farther along, one animal neither fled their approach nor acted hostile. This was a knee-high, snuffling quadruped with a greatly extended snout. Trent drew his sword as it ambled toward them, but Fanchon stopped him. "I recognize that one," she said. "It's a magic sniffer. It smells by magic." Bink asked. "It smells magic," she said. "We used to use one on my folks' farm, to sniff out magic herbs and things. The stronger the magic, the more it reacts." "But it's harmless. What does it feed on?" Trent asked, keeping his hand on his sword. "Magic berries. Other magic doesn't seem to affect it one way or the other, it is just curious. It doesn't differentiate by type of spell, just intensity." They stood and watched. Fanchon was nearest to the sniffer, so it approached her first. It snorted, making a flute-like sound. "See, I have some magic, it likes me," she said. "What magic?" Bink wondered. She had never shown any talent, and never actually told him what she could do. There was still too much he did not know about her. Satisfied, the sniffer moved on to Trent. This time its reaction was much stronger. It danced around, emitting a medley of notes. "Sure enough," Trent said, with a certain justified pride. "It knows a magician when it smells one." Then it came to Bink and frisked almost as much as it had for Trent. "So much for perception," Bink said, laughing with embarrassment, but Trent did not laugh. "It believes you are almost as strong a magician as I am," he said, his fingers tapping his sword with unconscious significance. Then he caught himself and seemed to be at ease again. "I wish I were," Bink said. "But I was banished for lack of magic." Yet the magician Humphrey had told him he had very strong magic that could not be brought out. Now his curiosity and frustration were increased by this happenstance. What kind of a talent could he have that hid itself so determinedly, or was it hidden by some outside spell? They trudged on. They cut poles with which to poke the ground ahead for invisible barriers and pitfalls and other suspiciously unsuspect aspects of the wild. This made progress slow, but they dared not hurry. Actually, they had no reason to hurry. Their only purposes were concealment and survival. Food turned out to be no problem. They did not trust the various fruit and candy trees they saw. Some might be magic, and serve the interests of their hosts rather than the interests of the consumers, though they looked similar to crop trees. But Trent merely turned a hostile thistle tree into a luxuriant multi-fruit tree, and they feasted on apples, pears, bananas, blackberries, and tomatoes. It reminded Bink how great was the power of a true magician, for Trent's talent really embraced that of food conjuration as a mere sub-talent. Properly exploited, the reach of his magic was enormous. But they were still heading into the wilderness, not out of it. Illusions became bolder, more persistent, and harder to penetrate. There were more sounds, louder, more ominous. Now and then the ground shuddered, and there were great not too distant bellowings. Trees leaned toward them, leaves twitching. "I think," Fanchon said, "we have not begun to appreciate the potency of this forest. Its whole innocuous permeability may have been merely to encourage us to get more deeply in." Bink, looking nervously about, agreed. "We picked the safest seeming route. Maybe that's where we went wrong. We should have taken the most threatening one." and gotten consumed by a tangled tree, Fanchon said. Let's try going back, Bink suggested. Seeing their doubt, he added, just to test. They tried it. Almost immediately the forest darkened and tightened. More trees appeared, blocking the way they had come. Were they illusions, or had they been invisible before? Bink was reminded of the one-way path he had walked from the good magician's castle. But this was more ominous. These were not nice trees, they were gnarled colossi bearing thorns and twitching vines. Branches crisscrossed one another, leaves sprouting to form new barriers even as the trio watched. Thunder rumbled in the distance, no doubt about it, Trent said. We failed to see the forest for the trees. I could transform any in our direct path, but if some started firing thorns at us we would be in trouble regardless. Even if we wanted to go that way, Fanchon said, looking west. We'd never have time to retrace it all through that resistance. Not before night, that was the worst time for hostile magic. But the alternative is to go the way it wants us to go, Bink said, alarmed. That may be easy now, but it surely is not our best choice. Perhaps the wilderness does not know us well enough, Trent said with a grim smile. I do feel competent to handle most threats, so long as someone watches behind me and stands guard as I sleep. Bink thought of the magician's powers of magic and swordplay, and had to agree. The forest might be one giant spider web, but that spider might become a gnat, unexpectedly. Maybe we should gamble that we can handle it, Bink said. At least we'll find out what it is. For the first time, he was glad to have the evil magician along. Yes, there is always that, Fanchon agreed sourly. Now that they had made the decision, progress became easier. The threatenings of the forest remained. But they assumed the aspect of background warnings. As dusk came, the way opened out into a clearing, within which stood an old, run-down stone fortress. Oh, no! Fanchon exclaimed. Not a haunted castle, thunder cracked behind them. A chill wind came up, cutting through their tunics. Bink shivered. I think we spend the night there or in the rain, he said. Could you transform it into a harmless cottage? My talent applies only to living things, Trent said. That excludes buildings and storms. Glowing eyes appeared in the forest behind them. If those things rush us, Fanchon said, you could only transform a couple before they were on us, since you can't zap them from a distance, and not at night, Trent said. Remember, I have to see my subject, too. All things considered, I think we had better oblige the local powers that be and enter the castle. Carefully, and once inside, we should sleep in shifts. It is likely to be a difficult night, Bink shuddered. The last place he wanted to spend the night was there, but he realized they had come far too deeply into the trap to extricate themselves readily. There was powerful magic here, the magic of an entire region. Too much to fight directly now, so they yielded, goaded by the looming storm. The ramparts were tall, but covered by moss and clinging vines. The drawbridge was down, its once stout timbers rotting in place. Yet there was an ancient, lingering, rugged magnificence about it. This castle has style, Trent observed. They tapped the planks, locating a reasonably solid section on which to cross. The moat was overgrown with weeds. And its water was stagnant. Shame to see a good castle get run down, Trent said. It is obviously deserted, and has been for decades, or centuries, Bink added. Why would a forest herd us into a derelict castle? Fanchon asked. Even if something really horrible lurks here, what would our deaths profit the forest? We were only passing through, and we would make it much faster if the forest just left us alone. We intended no harm, there is always a rationale, Trent said. Magic does not focus without purpose. They approached the front portcullis as the storm broke. That encouraged them to step inside, though the interior was almost black. Maybe we can find a torch, Fanchon said. Feel along the walls. Usually a castle will have something near the entrance. Crash. The raised portcullis, which they had assumed was corroded in place, crashed down behind them. The iron bars were far too heavy to lift, the three were trapped inside. The jaws close, Trent remarked, not seeming perturbed. But Bink could see that his sword was in his hand. Fanchon made a half-muffled scream, clutching at Bink's arm. He looked ahead and saw a ghost. There was no question about it, the thing was a humped white sheet with dead black eye holes. It made a mouthless moan. Trent's sword whistled as he stepped forward. The blade sliced through the sheet with no visible effect. The ghost floated away through a wall. This castle is haunted, no question, Trent said matter-of-factly, if you believe that. You wouldn't be so calm, Fanchon said accusingly, on the contrary. It is physical menaces I fear, Trent replied. The thing to remember about ghosts is that they have no concrete manifestation, and lack also the ability of shades to animate living creatures. Therefore they cannot directly affect ordinary people. They act only through the fear they inspire, so it is merely necessary to have no fear. In addition, this particular ghost was as the sound of the rain outside became loud. Then he made out Trent's gentle snoring. Bink. Fanchon said at last, what kind of a man would give his enemy his sword and go to sleep? That question had been bothering Bink. He had no satisfactory answer. A man with iron nerve, he said at last, knowing that could only be part of it. A man who extends such trust, she said thoughtfully, must expect to receive it. Well, if we're trustworthy and he isn't, he knows he can trust us. It doesn't work that way, Bink. It is the untrustworthy man who distrusts others, because he judges them by himself. I don't see how a documented liar and villain and schemer for the throne like the evil magician can be this way. Maybe he's not the historical Trent, but someone else, an imposter. An imposter would still be a liar. But we've seen his power. Magic is never twice the same. He has to be Trent the Transformer, yet something is wrong. Yes. Something is right, that's what's wrong. He trusts us. And he shouldn't. You could run him through right now, while he sleeps. Even if you didn't kill him with the first thrust, he could not transform you in the dark. I wouldn't do that. Bink exclaimed, horrified. Precisely. You have honor. So do I. It is hard to avoid the conclusion that so does he. Yet we know he is the evil magician. He must have spoken the truth before, Bink decided. He can't make it through the wilderness alone, and he figures he'll need help to get out of this haunted castle in one piece. And he knows we can't get out alive either, so we're all on the same side and won't hurt each other. So he's serious about the truce. But what about when we get out of all this and the truce ends? Bink didn't answer. With that they were silent. But his troubled thoughts continued. If they survived the night in this dread castle, they could probably survive the day. In the morning Trent might figure the truce was over. Bink and Fanchon could guard the magician through the night, then in the morning Trent could slay them both while they slept. If Trent had taken the first watch, he could not have done that, because he would have to slay the people who would protect him for the remainder of the evening. So it made sense to take the last watch. No. He was not ready to believe that. Bink himself had chosen the first watch. He had to have faith in the sanctity of the truce. If that faith was misplaced, then he was lost, but he would rather lose that way than to win through dishonor. That decision gave him comfort. Bink saw no more ghosts that night. At last he gave the sword to Fanchon. To his surprise, he managed to sleep. He woke at dawn. Fanchon was asleep beside him, looking less ugly than he recalled, in fact, not really homely at all. He certainly was acclimatizing. Would it ever come to the point where Trent seemed noble and Fanchon beautiful? Good, Trent said. He was wearing his sword again. Now that you can look out for her, I'll have a look around the premises. He walked on down the dim hall. They had survived the night. Bink wasn't sure in retrospect whether he had been more worried about the ghosts or the magician. He still lacked comprehension of the motives of either, and Fanchon, as the light brightened, he was sure her appearance had improved. She could hardly be called lovely, but she certainly was not the ugly girl he had perceived when he met her 4 days ago. In fact, she now reminded him of someone. Dee, he exclaimed. She woke. Yes, her response amazed him as much as the vague resemblance. He had called her Dee, but Dee was elsewhere in Xanth. Why, then, had she answered to that name as if it were her own? I just thought you. She sat up. You're right, of course, Bink. I knew I couldn't conceal it much longer. You mean you actually are? I am Chameleon, she said. Now he was totally confused. That was only a code word we used, to alert, and an omen. I am Fanchon ugly. She said. And the average. And Win, beautiful. I change a little every day, completing the circle in the course of a month. A lunar month. It's the female cycle, you know. Now he remembered how D2 had reminded him of someone. But Win was stupid. My intelligence varies inversely, she explained. That is the other facet of my curse. I range from ugly intelligence to lovely idiocy. I've been looking for a spell to turn me normal, a spell for Chameleon, he said musingly. What an astonishing enchantment. Yet it had to be true, for he had almost caught the similarity when he met Dee, so close to where he had lost Win, and now he had seen Fanchon change day by day. Chameleon, she had no magic talent, she was magic, like the centaurs or dragons. But why did you follow me into exile? Magic doesn't work outside Xanth. Humphrey told me I would gradually center on my normal state if I went to Mundania. I would be D, permanently completely average. That seemed my best choice. But you said you followed me. I did. You were kind to win. My mind may change, but my memory doesn't. You saved her from the Gap Dragon at great peril to yourself, and you didn't take advantage of her when she. Bink remembered the beautiful girl's willingness to disrobe. She had been too stupid to think through the likely consequence of her offer, but D and Fanchon, later, would have understood. And now I know you tried to help D, also. I shouldn't have cut you off then, but we weren't as smart then as later. And we didn't know you as well. She broke off. It doesn't matter, but it did matter. She was not one but three of the girls he had known, and one of those was excruciatingly beautiful. But also stupid. How should he react to this chameleon, the concept of the chameleon, again the magic lizard that changed its color and shape at will, mimicking other creatures? If only he could forget that omen or be sure he understood it. He was sure this chameleon meant him no harm. But she might in fact be the death of him. Her magic was involuntary, but it dominated her life. She had a problem, certainly, and so did he, so she had learned that he was to be exiled for lack of magic and made her decision. D without magic, Bink without magic, two ordinary people with a common memory of the land of magic, perhaps the only thing to sustain them in drear Mundania. No doubt her smart phase had figured that out. What an apt couple they could make, these two demigic souls. So she had acted but had had no way of knowing about the ambush set by the evil magician. It had been a good notion. Bink liked D. She was not so ugly as to turn him off, and not so lovely as to excite his distrust after his experiences with Sabrina and the sorceress Iris. What was the matter with beautiful women, that they could not be constant, but also not so stupid as to make it pointless? Just a reasonable compromise, an average girl he could have loved, especially in Mundania. But now they were back in Xanth, and her curse was in force. She was not simple D, but complex chameleon, swinging from extreme to extreme, when all he wanted was the average. I'm not so stupid yet that I can't figure out what's going through your mind, she said. I'm better off in Mundania, Bink could not deny it. Now he almost wished it had worked out that way. To have settled down with D, raised a family that could have been its own special brand of magic. There was a crash. Both reacted, orienting on the sound. It had come from somewhere above. Trent's in trouble, Bink said. He started down the hall, carrying his staff. Must be stairs somewhere. Behind his immediate consciousness he realized that this reaction indicated a fundamental change in his attitude toward the magician. That night with the sword and the sleeping man, if evil was as evil did, Trent could not be very evil. Trust compelled trust. Maybe the magician was only trying to manipulate Bink's attitude. Regardless, that attitude had suffered a fundamental erosion. Chameleon followed. Now that it was light, they had no fear of pitfalls, though Bink knew there could be magic ones. There was a grandly curving stone staircase beyond a palatial room. They charged up this. Suddenly a ghost loomed up. Oh, it moaned, its great eye holes staring like holes in a dark coffin. Get out of my way. Bink snapped, swinging his pole at it. The ghost, nonplussed, phased out. Bink ran through its remnant, feeling the momentary chill of its presence. Trent was right. There was no need to fear the insubstantial. Every step he took was solid. Apparently there were no illusions in this old castle, just its harmless resident spooks. That was a relief after the way they had been herded into it last night, but now there was silence upstairs. Bink and Chameleon picked their way through surprisingly opulent and well-preserved chambers, searching for their companion. At another time Bink would have admired the arrangements and tapestries of the rooms and halls at leisure, and been glad of the tight roof that had protected them from rain and weathering and rot, but right now his attention was preempted by concern. What had happened to Trent? If there were some monster lurking in this castle, summoning its victims by magic, then they found a kind of upstairs library. Fat old books and coiled scrolls were filed on shelves along the walls. In the center, at a polished wood table, sat Trent, poring over an open tome. Another peephole spell's got him, Bink cried. But Trent lifted his head. No, merely the thirst for knowledge, Bink. This is fascinating. A bit abashed, they halted. But the crash, Bink started. Trent smiled. My fault. That old chair gave way under my weight. He pointed to a tangle of wood. Much of the furniture here is fragile. I was so interested in this library that I was thoughtless. He rubbed his backside reminiscently. I paid for it. What's so fascinating about the books? Chameleon asked, "This one is a history of this castle." Trent explained. "It is not, it seems, just another artifact. This is Castle Rugna, Rugna." Bink exclaimed. "The magician king of the fourth wave, the same. He ruled from here, it seems. When he died and the fifth wave conquered Xanth, 800 years ago, his castle was deserted, and finally forgotten. But it was a remarkable structure. Much of the king's nature imbued the environs, the castle had an identity of its own, I remember," Bink said. "Rugna's talent was the conversion of magic to his own purposes." Trent said. "A subtle but powerful asset. He was the ultimate tamer of the forces around him. He cultivated the magic trees around here, and he built this fine castle. During his reign Xanth was in harmony with its populace. It was a kind of golden age, yes," Bink agreed. "I never thought I'd see this famous historical place." "You may see more of it than you want to," Trent said. "Remember how we were guided here? It seems like only yesterday," Bink said wryly. "Why were we herded here?" Chameleon demanded. Trent glanced at her, his gaze lingering. "I believe this locale behooves you, Fanchon." "Never mind that," she said. "I'll be a lot prettier before I'm through." "More's the pity, she is Chameleon," Bink said. "She shifts from ugly to pretty and back again, and her intelligence varies inversely. She left Xanth to escape that curse." "I would not regard that as a curse," the magician commented. "All things to all men in due time." "You're not a woman," she mapped. "I asked about this castle." Trent nodded. "Well, this castle requires a new resident. A magician. It is very selective, which is one reason it has lain dormant for so many centuries. It wants to restore the years of its glory, therefore it must support a new king of Xanth, and you're a magician." Bink exclaimed. "So when you came near, everything shoved you this way," "So it would seem." There was no malign intent, merely an overwhelming need. A need for Castle Rugna, and a need for Xanth to make this land again what it could be. "A truly organized and excellent kingdom, but you're not king," Chameleon said. "Not yet." There was a very positive quality to the statement. Bink and Chameleon looked at each other in developing comprehension. So the evil magician had reverted to form, assuming he had ever changed his form. They had discussed his human qualities, his seeming nobility, and been deceived. He had planned to invade Xanth, and now not ever, she flared. "The people would never tolerate a criminal like you." "They haven't forgotten, so you do have prior knowledge of my reputation," Trent said mildly. "I had understood you to say you had not heard of me." He shrugged. "However, the good citizens of Xanth may not have much choice, and it would not be the first time a criminal has occupied a throne," he continued calmly. "With the powers of this castle which are formidable added to mine, I may not need an army." "Will stop you," Chameleon said grimly. Trent's gaze touched her again, appraisingly. "Are you terminating the truce?" That gave her pause. The end of the truce would put the two of them directly in Trent's power, if what he said about this castle was true. "No," she said. "But when it does end," there was no hint of malignancy in Treat's smile. "Yes, it seems there will have to be a settlement. I had thought if I allowed you to go your way, you would extend the same courtesy to me. But when I said the people of Xanth would not necessarily have a choice, I did not mean it precisely the way you seem to have taken it. This castle may not permit us to do other than its will. For centuries it has endured here, hanging on against inevitable deterioration. Waiting for a magician of sufficient strength to qualify. Perhaps the magic sniffer we encountered in the forest was one of its representatives. Now it has found not one but two magicians. It will not lightly yield them up. From here we may be bound to glory or extinction, depending on our decision." "Two magicians?" she asked. "Remember, Bink has almost as much magic as I do." That was the verdict of the sniffer, and I am not certain it was mistaken. That would place him comfortably in the magician class. "But I have no talent," Bink protested. "Correction," Trent said. "To have an unidentified talent is hardly synonymous with having no talent. But even if you are talentless, there is strong magic associated with you. You may be magic, as is Fanchon, Chameleon," she said. "That's my real name, the others are merely phases." "I beg your pardon," Trent said, making a little sitting bow to her. "Chameleon, you mean I'll change somehow?" Bink asked, half hopeful, half appalled. "Perhaps. You might metamorphose into some superior form like a pawn becoming a queen." He paused. "Sorry, that's another mundane reference. I don't believe chess is known in Xanth. I have been too long in exile." "Well, I still won't help you try to steal the crown," Bink said stoutly. Naturally not. Our purposes differ. We may even be rivals. I'm not trying to take over Xanth, not consciously. But to prevent an evil magician from doing so, would you not consider ridiculous? Bink said. Disgruntled. The notion was preposterous, yet insidious. If the only way to prevent Trent from the time may indeed have come for us to part, Trent said. I have appreciated your company, but the situation seems to be changing. Perhaps you should attempt to leave this castle now. I shall not oppose you. Should we manage to separate, we can consider the truce abated. Fair enough, how nice, Chameleon said. You can relax over your books while the jungle tears us up. I do not think anything here will actually hurt you. Trent said. The theme of Castle Rugna is harmony with man. He smiled again. Harmony, not harm. But I rather doubt you will be permitted to depart. Bink had had enough. I'll take my chances. Let's go, you want me to come along? Chameleon asked hesitantly, unless you prefer to stay with him. You might make a very pretty queen in a couple of weeks, Trent laughed. Chameleon moved with alacrity. They walked to the stairs, leaving the magician poring over his book again. Another ghost interrupted them. This one seemed larger than the others, more solid. Warning, it moaned. Bink stopped. You can speak. What is your warning, Doom Beyond? Stay, oh. Well, that's a chance we've already decided to take, Bink said. Because we are loyal to Xanth, the spirit repeated with a certain feeling, yes, Xanth. So we must leave. The ghost seemed nonplussed. It faded, it almost seems they're on our side, Chameleon commented. Maybe they're just trying to make us stay in the castle. Though, we can't afford to trust ghosts, Bink agreed. They could not exit through the front gate, because the portcullis was firm and they did not understand the mechanism for lifting it. They poked through the downstairs rooms, searching for an alternate exit. Bink opened one promising door and slammed it shut as a host of leather-winged, long-toothed creatures stirred. They looked like vampire bats. He cracked the next open more carefully and a questing rope twined out, more than casually reminiscent of the tree vines. Maybe the cellar, Chameleon suggested, spying stairs leading down. They tried it. But at the foot, huge, baleful rats scurried into place, and they were facing, not fleeing, the intruders. The beasts looked too hungry, too confident. They surely had magic to trap any prey that entered their territory. Bink poked his staff at the nearest, experimentally. Scat, he exclaimed. But the rat leaped onto the pole, climbing up toward Bink's hands. He shook it, but the creature clung, and another jumped to the staff. He thunked it against the stone floor, hard, but still they hung on, and still they climbed. That must be their magic, the ability to cling, Bink. Above. Chameleon cried. There was a chittering overhead. More rats were crowding the beams, bracing themselves to leap. Bink threw the staff away and backed hastily up the stairs, holding on to Chameleon for support until he could get turned around. The rats did not follow. This castle is really organized, Bink said as they emerged on the main floor. I don't think it intends to let us go peacefully. But we've got to try. Maybe a window, but there were no windows on the ground floor. The outer wall had been built to withstand siege. No point in jumping from an upper turret, someone would surely break a bone. They moved on, and found themselves in the kitchen area. Here there was a back exit, normally used for supplies, garbage, and servants. They slipped out and faced a small bridge across the moat, an ideal escape route, but there was motion on the bridge already. Snakes were emerging from the rotten planking. Not healthy, normal reptiles, but tattered, discolored things whose bones showed through oozing gaps in the sagging flesh. Those are zombie snakes. Chameleon cried with genuine horror. Waked from the dead, it figures, Bink said grimly. This whole castle is waked from the dead. Rats can thrive anywhere, but the other creatures died out when the castle died, or maybe they come here to die even now. But zombies aren't as strong as real living things. We can probably handle them with our staffs. But he had lost his own staff in the cellar. Now he smelled the stench of corruption, worse than that of the harpy. Waves of it rose from the festering snakes and the putrescent moat. Bink's stomach made an exploratory heave. He had seldom encountered genuine, far advanced decay. Usually either creatures were living or their bones were fairly neat and clean. The stages in between, of spoilage and maggot infestation and disintegration, were a part of the cycle of life and death he had chosen not to inspect closely. Hitherto. I don't want to try that bridge, Chameleon said. We'll fall through and there are zombie crocs in the water. So there were. big reptiles threshing the slimy surface with leather-covered bones, their worm-eaten eyes gazing up. Maybe a boat, Bink said. Or a raft, Even if it weren't rotten and filled with zombie bugs, it would look across the water. He looked. Now came the worst of all, walking jerkily along the far bank of the moat, human zombies, some mummified. Others hardly more than animate skeletons. Bink watched the awful things for a long moment, fascinated by their very grotesqueness. Fragments of wrappings and decayed flesh dropped from them. Some dribbled caked dirt left from their over-hasty emergence from their unquiet graves. It was a parade of putrefaction. He thought of fighting that motley army, hacking apart already destroyed bodies, feeling their rotting, vermin-riddled flesh on his hands, wrestling with those ghastly animations. Saturated with the cloying stink of it all. What loathsome diseases did they bear? What gangrenous embraces would they bestow on him as they fell apart? What possible attack would make these moldering dead lie down again? The spell-driven things were closing in, coming across the ragged bridge. Surely this was even worse for the zombies, for they could not voluntarily have roused themselves. They could not retire to the pleasant seclusion of the castle interior. To be pressed into service in this state. Instead of remaining in the bliss of oblivion. I don't think I'm ready to leave yet, Bink said. No, Chameleon agreed, her face somewhat green. Not this way, and the zombies halted, giving Bink and Chameleon time to re-enter Castle Rugna.